Going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NBA Deeper Dive. Ready to jump into this 10-gamer. I'm Dave Loughran. Find me on the Twitter at Laffy_D. Go ahead, give me a follow right now. I won't hold it against you. At Laffy_D, LOUGHY_D. And do the same for my man Adam Scherer at ShipMyMoney DFS. Dude, a lot going on since I did the strategy show with Josh this morning. The Trae Young news, the Stephen Curry news, the entire New Orleans Pelicans team out for the second straight day, and now add Josh Hart to that. What an absolute mess this is. This legitimately feels like April basketball, and it is.
Yeah, and I'd actually somehow missed the Hawks news. I think it came out right around the same time as the Pelicans news, so I was like rewriting stuff for the Pelicans and missed the Hawks. So yeah, even crazier slate than I thought we had 5 minutes ago.
How brutal was writing the deep dive today?
It's terrible. I mean, it's always tough because like this time of year I put it off because like I know there's going to be a bunch of news, but then I just end up having to like rush through it, which makes it like more stressful. And so it's kind of like a lose-lose this time of year. It's not that fun.
But it is entirely free, and it is the most comprehensive NBA DFS article for free that you're going to find out there at Awesemo.com. Go ahead and do that. And before we jump into it, be sure, you know what? I'll wait later until we get a few more people in here to tell you about a great promo we got going. It's actually 9 days for $9, all of our MLB content using the promo code starting9 if you go to awesemo.com/promos. But we'll get into that a little bit more later. Anyway, we're happy to have all of you guys with us as we do to kick off every show. Adam, initial thoughts on this slate. Are we looking at a clear stars and scrubs slate for the second straight night?
Kind of. There's no stars though. I mean, there's a couple. There's Luka and there's Giannis, and I guess Towns. But yeah, I mean, you have the Pelicans once again playing without any of their best players, almost any of their best players. You have obviously Atlanta playing very shorthanded. So there's going to be a lot of value you can go to, and then it's just going to be about maximizing your projected points basically, or your upside. You know, you're not going to be too concerned about the point per dollar value of these top end guys because it doesn't really matter on a slate where you have this much value. So I think it's another slate where, I mean, for a 10-game slate, it's going to feel pretty small, especially if you're playing cash games. There's going to be a lot of overlap again. You know, I think yesterday in some of the contests I looked at on DraftKings and cash, like 6 of the 8 guys in my lineup were like 65+% owned. I think it's gonna be another one of those types of slates tonight, just because there's such obvious plays. In tournaments, obviously you can get a little bit more creative, but at the same time, there are some guys where it's just gonna be really difficult for them to fail because of how shorthanded teams are. So yeah, it feels pretty similar to last night and probably the night before that and the one before that.
I sure hope you guys caught Dr. Ben Rasa on the NBA tip-off show today, because that was awesome. The guy's been on such a heater that I don't even care if we're being gimmicky because it works. Would you ever have imagined, though, that Ben would be the one to actually agree to that? He'd be the last person other than you.
I fully accept. What was the last thing you said?
I said, other than you, he's the last person I would ever. I've been trying to get you to do Halloween shit with me for like 5 years now, and it never happens.
Yeah, no, I actually kind of expect. So I didn't realize that he was actually wearing that on the show. I thought it was like photoshopped and we just like tweeted it out. So I was like 60% expecting Ben to jump in the chat and be like, what the hell is this thing? Like, I didn't realize he had like done it on the show.
The best part. It looked great. And look, he's just been killing it. I think he went 10 straight wins in the month of March. He was just absolutely on fire. What is it, 11 you said? Yeah, Tyler Zan tells me it was 11 straight. He just keeps going, man. It's a beautiful thing. Anyway, what's up, everybody? Happy to have you guys with us. Hit that thumbs up. Go ahead and hammer that as hard as you can. And if you hate the show, hit that thumbs down. But you got to do it twice. It's the only way it works. We need to know that you dislike it by hitting that twice. Biggest thing, though, subscribe to the channel. As you know, only like 50% of people that watch this channel are subscribed. Remedy that wrong, fix that, join, hit that notification bell if you want to know when we go live. And if you don't like us, just unsubscribe. We will refund your misery, no doubt about it. Pretty easy solution there. But subscribe. I think you'll be happy to hang around and join a pretty awesome community here, and hit that thumbs up while you're at it. Okay, you ready to dive into this?
Yeah.
All right, 10 games. We'll kick it off with Golden State and Toronto. The Warriors will be without Steph Curry today. That was some news that broke this afternoon. They're 5-point dogs, 219 total. No Curry, but then you've got Jordan Poole, who was questionable, and Draymond Green, both of them probable. So we will get them. So it's a little bit less messy than you would expect. But does this mean that we go back to Jordan Poole again like we've been doing, or has that price come up enough to where it's just not worth it?
Site dependent, I think. On DraftKings, Poole's up over 6K, which I think is fine. Like in tournaments, you can certainly still go there. He obviously has a high ceiling. He's averaged about 0.9 fantasy points per minute in his 5 starts without Curry. He's going to play a bunch of minutes. He's going to shoot a good amount. But because of the Pelicans news, at that price point and the guard positions, I don't think he comes out as like a top guard play, which does mean that in tournaments, you'll probably be able to get him at a little bit lower ownership because people will go to the Pelicans. He is one guy you could pivot to away from, guys like Bledsoe or Alexander Walker in tournaments potentially. On FanDuel, though, he's only 4,200. They as soon as Steph Curry rejoined the lineup, they just nerf the price on Poole immediately. So 4,200 for him on FanDuel really stands out there. Obviously still a very crowded point guard position, but he, I think, is clearly an excellent value there.
So how does the rest of the Golden State Warriors team shake out without their very clear best player in Stephen Curry? Because, I look on DraftKings and you're right. Is Poole fine? Yeah, but he's not going to be getting a lot of ownership for pretty obvious reasons, north of $6,000. And on FanDuel, pulling ownership up here, Jordan Poole, as you mentioned, 4,200 is going to get a lot of ownership. But Draymond Green also getting some attention. Of course, you have to play 2 power forwards anyway. He's $6,600 and expected to play. I'm always cautious, or at least I'm always leery about the notion that Draymond Green markedly improves with Steph Curry and other stars off the floor, because he's just never going to be a high usage guy. Of course, he's going to see more opportunities as a playmaker. He's a great passer for someone in his position. But does he exponentially get better? I don't know if the answer to that is yes in a spot like this, but it all comes down to price point, right, Adam?
Yeah, and I honestly don't know that he gets better at all. In 5 games without Curry this year, 0.85 DraftKings points per minute. But the thing is, and you mentioned it, when you think about Draymond's game, he's going to score a little bit. He's going to get some rebounds, but he's not the type of guy that when you take Steph Curry's usage out, Draymond's not going to go take 20 shots. And even if he did, he probably would make 7 of them. So it wouldn't really matter. The thing with Draymond, the reason he's valuable in DFS first and foremost is his assists. And even when Curry plays, he's got an assist percentage over 30%. I think what Curry being out mostly does, the biggest impact it has on Draymond, is that it takes the best shooter on the team off the floor for a guy that needs assists to score points. So, does Draymond still have a high ceiling? He does, because he's still a triple-double threat. He's still going to get a lot of assists. He's just not going to convert his potential assists at his higher rate without Curry out there. And that's what you've seen so far in the games that he's played without Curry, only a 29% assist percentage in those games. So I think Draymond's fine. I don't think he stands out as a priority here. And that's really how I feel about the rest of Golden State as well, because you get a higher ceiling for Andrew Wiggins. We've seen a few monster games from him with Curry out, but the concern I have is that, while his usage increases and that does increase the ceiling, he's also shot over 50% from 3 in the games he's played without Curry. That's not going to continue. His rebounding percentage is up to 10%. Overall this season, it's about 7.5%. I don't think Curry being out is going to increase Wiggins' rebounding numbers by that much. I think it's probably just a small sample size thing. So I don't buy into him continuing to produce 1.17 fantasy points per minute just because Curry's out. I think the ceiling is certainly there, but I think that we just haven't really seen games where he doesn't shoot well over that stretch. So I think he's more expensive than he should be, but I do think he still has a high ceiling there. And so it's another spot where I don't mind going to it in tournaments. You're just going to see so much ownership going to the Pelicans guys that, paying a little bit more for Andrew Wiggins and hoping he just has one more game where he shoots really well. There's certainly some merit to that in tournaments, but I think it's important to note, that his numbers without Curry so far are pretty fluky.
So I was surprised that Toronto was favored by 2.5 points early on when Curry was healthy, because they've managed to, you guys are so tired of me hearing this, but they've managed in all seriousness to lose to a lot of really bad teams recently. I get it now without Steph Curry, because the Warriors are just a dreadful team in that respect when he's off the floor. They're 5-point favorites now at home without the likes of Kyle Lowry. And if you want to throw Rodney Hood into the mix, we can do that as well. Yeah, Paul Watson also out. But let's break down Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam today with no Lowry on the floor.
Those are the two, obviously the two primary pieces here. Siakam has averaged about 37 minutes per game in the games he's played without Lowry and with Van Vliet this year. Likewise for Van Vliet, over 37 minutes per game. One other thing to keep in mind, though, is that Norman Powell went to Portland, was replaced by Gary Trent. Gary Trent's a lower usage player than Norman Powell. So if you look at numbers without Lowry or Powell on the floor this year, the sample size gets pretty small, but you do get an even higher usage rate for Van Vliet, similar rates for Siakam as well. So I think it's even a slightly better spot for each of these guys than it would be, earlier in the year when Powell was on the team. I think they both stand out, especially Siakam on DraftKings, 7,800 is a very good price point. 7,400 for Van Vliet on FanDuel is a very good price point. I think that they are good plays, Siakam on FanDuel and Van Vliet on DraftKings as well, but definitely each one definitely has a more appealing price point on one site.
Okay, so when you get past those guys, of course, the absence of any of the big three for Toronto, they lose a lot of games, but they're still all pretty productive. The absence of any one of those three has a pretty significant effect on a number of spots here, especially with Norman Powell gone. And we know that Nick Nurse is someone that's very much willing to run a condensed rotation, right? Like he could have Kyle Lowry out and run an 8-man rotation, and it wouldn't surprise you. Norman Powell could come into the lineup before and play 36 minutes like nothing happened. So what do you see? And of course, we saw Kyle Lowry out the other day as well, so that's understandable. But is there anyone with Powell gone and with Lowry out that benefits that isn't named Siakam or Van Vliet?
Yeah, I mean, I think it still benefits OG Anunoby. It still benefits Gary Trent, and it still benefits, or has the potential, I should say, to benefit either of Aaron Baines or Chris Boucher. Like the primary pieces are obviously Siakam and Van Vliet, but you're still getting more solidified minutes for OG Anunoby. You're getting a little bit more production because, again, that drop from Powell to Trent makes a difference for him too. Gary Trent, not the highest usage guy, but he played 36 minutes last game, and I assume you get similar playing time there. That's a pretty appealing amount of minutes for someone priced at 5,200 or 5,600 depending on the site. The thing is just that on this particular slate, it still doesn't really make him stand out because there's so much value. And then at center, really no idea what Nick Nurse is going to do. I mean, 2 games ago against Portland, Aaron Baines got the start. He played 14 minutes. Siakam played 24, or Boucher played 24 off the bench. Last game against Oklahoma City, Baines started and played 21 minutes. Boucher only played 19. Baines' minimum salary on DraftKings, Boucher's 5,200. If either of these guys play 24 plus minutes, they are underpriced, but there's just no guarantee that happens because you also have Siakam playing minutes at the 5, which he obviously can do against Golden State. So I wouldn't feel comfortable with either of those players, but they both are guys that probably are relatively low owned given the slate and do give you a pretty high ceiling for their salary.
All right, let's talk about Houston and Boston. Then we've got the Houston Rockets, 11.5-point dogs, 223 total at TD Garden. John Wall still remains questionable. Thompson out on the other side. He has been out for quite some time now. And I think you mentioned this. We've both talked about this a lot. Boston has a reputation for being a very good defense, but they actually haven't been that good of a defense. As a matter of fact, on the season, they have a bottom 10 defensive rating. They don't play at the fastest pace, but they're somewhere around the middle of the league. I guess bottom 10, actually, 20th. But is Houston a team that you might be interested in today, whether John Wall plays or maybe he sits and that opens something up for Kevin Porter Jr.?
I'm not too interested. I mentioned it before, but also I do think Boston gets better defensively going forward than they have been. Like we know Marcus Smart missed a bunch of time, but I also think that having Robert Williams in the lineup is going to be good for them defensively too. So we'll have to wait and see. But I don't really like the pricing too much on the Houston guys. Like if John Wall plays, he's fine in tournaments. He's we've talked about it before. Like for his salary, he's not the most efficient scorer. He's averaged about 1.2 DraftKings points per minute, but it's very hard to find players in his price range that have the same rates as him. And even if you're inefficient, kind of like we were talking about with Andrew Wiggins, an increased usage percentage and a really high assist percentage mean that you at least have a very, very high ceiling because you're contributing, such a large percentage of your team's offense. So Wall would have a really high ceiling. I assume you'd get 33 or 34 minutes if he plays. If he's out, it's a nice bump for Kevin Porter, who should play a lot, but he's priced up a little bit as well. And then Christian Wood, never someone that I'm going to tell people not to roster because he does produce at a high rate, but there are a lot of mid-range centers that look pretty good tonight. I think if you're going to Christian Wood, he looks a little bit better on FanDuel at power forward.
A question for you, and I saw Jared Neal bring this up in chat. What does this do for Brad Stevens' reputation this season? Like just a one-sentence answer. Does it hurt his reputation? Because he was viewed as a mastermind, especially in those Philly series where he outcoached Brett Brown, who was just an objectively bad coach.
Well, it's hard for me to say because you could tell me that Boston was anywhere between 15 games under 500 and 15 games over, and I would have no idea which was true. So,
okay, fair enough. What if I told you they are? I'm about to tell you right now. What about? And we got plenty of time. Don't worry. I saw somebody mention that as well. There's a bunch of games that we won't even really hit on much at all. Atlanta, New Orleans, we will spend the bulk of our time, so do not worry. They are 23 and 25, so they're 2 games below 500 with that roster.
You said 2 games below?
Below 500.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely not doing Brad Stevens any favors.
Okay.
I'm someone that typically thinks the coaches are sort of overrated when their team's doing well and get too much shit when their team's doing poorly. So, like, for me personally, it doesn't really change a whole lot. But in the general narrative, like, it's obviously not great.
The only ones that really matter are managers in baseball. Boston. What are your thoughts then on the Brad Stevens-led Boston Celtics against the Rockets today? I mean, they got to get a W here, right?
You would hope. I think from a DFS standpoint, there's nothing. Well, it's tough to get too excited about most of these guys because you just have a fully healthy team as far as guys that matter in terms of usage. You know, you add Evan Fournier, but then you still have Kemba, you have Brown, you have Tatum, you have Smart. So for those guys, it's tough for me to prioritize them. I still think if you're playing a bunch of tournament lineups, you know, obviously you can make a case for Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum just because it's a good matchup and they're obviously really good players. But the only guy here that really stands out to me that I would want to get to with any sort of frequency is Robert Williams. He missed last game. He was a late scratch not long before lock, but not on the injury report today. 6,700 on DraftKings, I think 6,600 on FanDuel. Pretty good price tag for him. You know, he has started 3 games now. He's averaged 28.5 minutes per game, played 32 in the most recent. He's not a high usage guy, which on the one hand is kind of scary in DFS because if he happens to have a poor rebounding game or not get blocked shots, he's unlikely to make up for it by scoring. But when you think about the construction of the Celtics, it's nice because he's not competing with Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Kemba and these guys. He's not going to score a lot regardless outside of, you know, whatever he kind of grabs on the offensive board. So he gets most of his production from rebounding, from block shots. He's excellent at blocking shots. And, you know, obviously those points pile up. So I still think that there's quite a bit of value on Robert Williams here, even though he is a volatile option because of the way in which he produces fantasy points.
Okay. So from this game, any priorities on either side?
Robert Williams.
Okay. Dallas and New York. Dallas Mavericks, by the way, low total in this game for obvious reasons, 212.5, 2 teams that play at some of the slowest paces in the league. New York playing with a very strong defense this year. Dallas still touchdown favorites on the road. Nobody's injured here. No real news, nothing to discuss there outside of the fact that Luka Doncic, as you mentioned right at the top of the show, you're horrible. Outside at the top of the show, there aren't really that many studs. Does that put Luka in play, or is it still kind of like, I don't like this spot at all?
Yeah. So I think on DraftKings, he's going to be a lot easier to fit into lineups than on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he has point guard, small forward eligibility. So you can roster him at like 5 of the 8 spots. And the forward positions today are just nowhere near as strong as the guard positions. On FanDuel, it's going to be tough. You know, not that there's anything wrong with Luka. And it actually means maybe he's a good tournament option because optimal roster construction is going to force people away from him. But, you know, you have so many really good point guard options between Bledsoe, Kira Lewis, Jordan Poole, John Morant. Like there's so many guys that you can go to here that are relatively inexpensive that it's going to be tough to get to Luka. Again, you know, on DraftKings where you can put him at small forward, I think it's going to be easier. But really, it's just going to come down to, you know, I don't love the matchup against the Knicks, but there's so much value on the slate that, you know, like we said at the top of the show, you're kind of just going to end up at the top end plugging in the guys that fit the best into your lineup, regardless of their point per dollar projections, because you just need to get raw points at some point. And Luka obviously gives you that despite a pretty unappealing matchup.
Does anything else appeal to you from Dallas?
No.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, you know, Porzingis, if you're looking for a tournament piece other than Luka from the Mavericks, Porzingis is the next guy there, but he doesn't stand out as a particularly strong option, I don't think.
Yeah, and again, like I said, this is one of those specific games that we won't be taking a ton of time on. Dallas 22nd in pace, the Knicks dead last, 30th in pace this season. That doesn't mean that games like this can't have decent fantasy production, especially when you've got a Luka on one side and a Julius Randle on the other. So totally understandable that we could be looking at this and saying, all right, not bad. Now, the Dallas Mavericks, while they play slow, do have a bottom 8 defense. They've shown a little bit of improvement since the start of the season where they just looked awful after coming out again to the playoffs and putting up some quality performances against really tough teams. They look nothing like that team that we saw in the bubble. So Julius Randle, we speak a lot about this guy. And the biggest thing for me, Adam, isn't that he's really good or the fact that he is got a phone call, sorry. Or the fact that Julius Randle plays on a team that doesn't have a ton of other guys with monster usage, but he's averaging like 38.5 minutes per game since the start of March, which is such a massive number for a very good player. Is that enough to get to him today on a day where you said we don't have a ton of top tier options?
Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't say he's a priority. Like we'll talk about Giannis. Obviously, I prefer him at power forward, and I don't think it'll be that hard to make up the difference. But we have seen Randle's price come down, particularly on FanDuel. He's down to 8,900, 9,600 on DraftKings. Not the best salary, but not terrible either. One thing to keep an eye on here is that RJ Barrett is questionable and Derrick Rose is questionable. We had talked about it, you and I think the last time Randle played, that he's really, really good. From a fantasy standpoint, regardless of who he's playing with, but his assist numbers do go up in games that Derrick Rose hasn't played, and he's been more productive in those games, which I think you would expect. So if Barrett's out, if Rose is out, those guys both are such a big percentage of the Knicks offense behind Julius Randle that I think you would just see Randle take on an even bigger workload. But assuming those guys are in, Randle I think still looks fine. Again, I think it would probably take me more than like one lineup to start to get to Randle, but I do think that there's not a ton of guys on this slate that really give you that 60 fantasy point upside, and Randle is one of them.
Yeah, he is. And we've seen that multiple times just recently. So I think there's a potential big game there today, especially if it stays competitive, which there's no reason to believe it shouldn't at least stay somewhat close. Anything else for the New York side? Again, we haven't spent a lot of time on this game, but want to make sure we hit on everything. Anything else for the Knicks?
No, I mean, again, just pay attention to the injury report. Like, there are so many moving parts here that I don't want to get bogged down in trying to go through like all of them, but potentially you could get a lot of extra minutes for Elfrid Payton or Quickly or Alec Burks with Barrett, Rose, and Bullock all questionable.
So we can move to Charlotte, Indiana if we don't have anything else. The only other thing I'd say is, and I mentioned this morning, with Reggie Bullock being out, or I'm sorry, not out, questionable, with Barrett being questionable and Rose being questionable. The problem with Barrett being out is even if he was out, right? He's questionable now, but even if he did happen to sit, you're rolling dice on what Tom Thibodeau is going to do. And even if you do get someone that gets enough minutes, I just don't know if anyone's good enough to really exploit that on a night where there's so much value anyway. So I don't think it's that big of a deal with these pending injury news.
If Alec Burks is going to get 33 minutes or something as a $5,800 small forward, I think that's pretty valuable.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I don't see it being like a groundbreaking opportunity because he's already kind of expensive, but I guess you're right. He's not overpriced. He's just kind of where he should be. Like, what do you think? He should be 6,500 if RJ Barrett was out?
Yeah, I mean, probably something like that. Like, I obviously haven't tried to make a lineup with those guys out yet. I don't know if Burks would end up in my cash lineup just because, like you said, there are so many value options. But I do know small forward's a pretty weak position tonight. So it wouldn't surprise me, at least, like if those guys were ruled out when I crunch my top lineups, if some of them are getting to $5,800 Alec Burks at a forward spot.
Gene B. Kim, appreciate the super chat, brother. He says, Adam, your Nats ruined opening day for me. Why do we love PJ Washington tonight? Gene, stick around on Monday for the Awesemo Hall of Fame segment. Gene but it was another $20,000 hit with the Awesemo logo. Gotta love it. Once we bring that back on Monday, that will be the first one introduced into the new segment. And I don't love I know Josh is a big PJ Washington guy. We'll get there. Actually, as a matter of fact, Gene, good timing. Let's do that right now. Charlotte and Indiana. So the Charlotte Hornets yesterday put forth one of the worst efforts I've seen in recent memory for a professional basketball team. Malik Monk is out. They're 5-point dogs against the Indiana Pacers and 219 total. We were like halfway through the second quarter or more, Adam, and there wasn't a single guy in the starting lineup that had more than 3 points. I mean, Hayward stunk. Rozier stunk. Graham stunk. I think the highest fantasy total was 28 points from Bridges or something egregious like that. And no surprise, PJ Washington wasn't very good either because he kind of never is.
Yeah, I had Hayward on FanDuel, and I know I look at one point and I saw a score. I was like, oh, I guess the Charlotte game just started, and it was like halfway through the second quarter. I don't think I looked at FanDuel again the rest of the night, but yeah, I mean, it was a really, really bad effort last night against Brooklyn. You can go back to them tonight. Like, Indiana hasn't been a bad matchup recently. They're top 10 in pace over the last month, middle of the pack, a little bit worse actually in defensive rating. So I don't mind the spot here, but I think it's another situation where the pricing is much more favorable on FanDuel. PJ Washington is $1,000 less expensive on FanDuel than DraftKings. I have no issue whatsoever paying $5,200 for PJ Washington. You do want to keep in mind that Charlotte has been playing Zeller and Biyombo for most, if not all, of the center minutes recently, which is a pretty big negative for PJ Washington. He's much, much more productive as a center, both as an actual NBA player and a DFS producer. So that's not great. But again, at 5,200, if this game's competitive, you're assuming you're going to get somewhere around 32 minutes from Washington. Perfectly fine on FanDuel. Less interesting on DraftKings at 6,200. I would want to be more confident that he was getting center minutes to roster him at that price. Same can really be said. Gordon Hayward, 7,900 on DraftKings, I think is okay. 7K on FanDuel looks a lot better. He should play 35 or 36 minutes if this game's close. Should be getting around 1.05 to 1.1 fantasy points per minute, which is pretty appealing. There's nothing that really stands out from Charlotte on DraftKings for me. I think Hayward and Washington are both very favorably priced on FanDuel. Terry Rozier is fine. Devontae Graham is fine. But I would say Washington and Hayward on FanDuel are the only things that I really see from Charlotte.
Okay. What do you see from the Pacers? Do you think Sabonis is in or out? He left Wednesday's game with a bruised left quad, but came back despite the issue. So I think we're looking I think he's expected to play, but I kind of never take that at face value because whenever we do, it just doesn't work out. But we'll assume he's in for now, Adam, and you tell me what you're doing with the Pacers as a result.
Yeah, I mean, assuming he plays, I think Sabonis looks fine. His usage is down a bit in the games since Caris LeVert joined the team, but he just does so much in the way of everything else, getting rebounds, getting assists, playing huge minutes, and still scoring enough. He still averaged about 1.33 DraftKings points per minute in the games he's played with LeVert and with Brogdon. So I'm not shying away from him if he's active. I think the price point looks fine. $300 less expensive than Julius Randle on DraftKings is nice. He's $300 more expensive on FanDuel, so I'd give a slight edge to Randle there. But I think pretty similar plays. Feel pretty similarly about them too. Like, I'm not going to be upset if they're in my lineup. If you're building a lineup and you have Sabonis, I'm not going to say you shouldn't play him. I think that in like my first or second lineup, they probably wouldn't be in there just because of how many good plays there are on this slate. But no issues there, and that's really how I feel about Malcolm Brogdon as well. He's 7K on DraftKings, 6,600 on FanDuel. When I initially wrote the point guard section of the deep dive today, I really liked Brogdon because we didn't have the Pelicans news yet. And so it was okay, well, if the Pelicans are healthy, then Brogdon is, I think, a little bit underpriced in the spot against Charlotte. Once you got that Pelicans news, he's not quite as underpriced because you have to compare him to guys like Bledsoe and Lewis and Alexander Walker. So Brogdon, I think, is, a fine secondary option in tournaments, but the way news has broken on this slate makes it a lot more difficult to get to him.
Okay. Do you have Sabonis in?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just say, because what we do here on the deep dive, this is why it makes us the best show out there, is we cover everything and the hypotheticals. If Sabonis is out, do you see like Jakar Sampson getting more minutes, Doug McDermott getting a start here against Charlotte? Would anybody be a top option for you if the clear top player for Indiana is sidelined?
So it would bump the rates for Brogdon. It would bump rates for Caris LeVert. I think, obviously that it would be important for those guys. My guess is that you would get Doug McDermott in the starting lineup. He's started in the past. I think it was when Turner was out and they slid Sabonis to center. But, still, I would, my guess would be McDermott, but we've seen them use kind of weird spot starters in the past. But assuming McDermott started, he would probably play around 30 minutes. On a lot of slates, I think that would be pretty appealing. On this slate, it would be okay. Like, he's only 3,800 on DraftKings, but it wouldn't be something that I'm super excited about.
Okay. So we've got.
I think you would also get more minutes for Miles Turner if Sabonis is out, which actually could be pretty big.
Yeah, Miles Turner's an interesting one. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I do think Sabonis plays, but I've been wrong before. Like I said, Malik Monk just the other day was probable and ended up not playing. So we see that quite often. Here's a better example. Adam Paul George was out yesterday and ended up playing. So
go back 4 days. You had Michael Carter Williams out literally when the game started and he played.
Yeah, I know. That's why we cover everything, unless it's just like egregious. I'm not going to say, well, if Mitchell Robinson plays tonight, it's of course things can be a little bit too far fetched. But yeah, that's the breakdown in the event that Sabonis does sit, and then things change up a lot. And by the way, remember, I tell you guys this all the time. You can use OddsShopper.awesemo.com for free to get the biggest edge out there for all of your sports betting needs. And nothing on there do you have to pay for. Also, if you're signing up for books, be sure to use those links because they have insane sign-up bonuses, insane like $500 first bets, nutty stuff. Trying to acquire new customers before the sports betting boom really hits the U.S. when all of the states start opening it up. But it's called OddsShopper because we've got lines and odds and props from all of the different books, allowing you to make the decision on which book has the best line, the best odds, make the decision, the wise decision on which one to take. And I've read a bunch of books on sports betting, and the one common theme is always you can't be lazy and just take everything from the same sports book. You got to find the edge somewhere, and the best way to do it is finding that little edge in one of those retail books that may have copied a line elsewhere and hasn't changed it yet, and it went stale, or it's just wrong. So it is what it is, and all of that great stuff over there is totally free. You can track your bets as well. You can set up alerts in order to get alerted when a line moves the way you're looking for when you're willing to hit it. So much other stuff. And my favorite part is with the props. I'll just type a player's name in and his props all pop up. I don't have to scroll through all of that mess on the other books. But what I was actually getting at is if Sabonis happens to be ruled out, some of these books will not get it off. They've been a little quicker lately, but they won't get it off the board for a solid minute, sometimes longer. And if you have the alerts on your phone, you're getting it at the same time as they are. You definitely want to take advantage of that stuff. Like the Stephen Curry one today, you would have got 2.5 points. With Paul George playing, you would have got however many points. It's not about the result. It's about you being able to beat that closing line because over time, it's going to benefit you. And using oddshopper.awesemo.com can be a great help in doing so. All right, let's talk about Minnesota and Memphis. The Minnesota Timberwolves are actually a team that Josh said he was somewhat intrigued by today. Now, granted, that was before all of the news broke where a ton of value popped up, but they're 6-point dogs, 230.5 total. What are your thoughts on McDaniels here, who's actually getting a lot of minutes? Jaden McDaniels has played 33-plus minutes in 4 straight and 36-plus in each of his last 3.
Yeah, I mean, it's just still tough for me to trust him because he hasn't been a very productive player overall this season. I know he's playing well now and he's playing a lot of minutes. The price on FanDuel is okay at $4,600. He's $300 less than DraftKings. I think it's pretty tough to pay almost $5K for him on DraftKings. It's okay. Like the minutes have been there. He's been playing relatively well. It's just really tough for me. Like he's still playing alongside Towns. He's playing alongside Edwards. He's playing alongside Beasley. It's hard for me to see where sustained production comes from.
Me too. Hey, by the way, Tyler, I think this was probably my fault. No, never mind. It was your fault. Can you change the Chicago or Charlotte, Utah to Chicago, Utah, por favor? On the side. Thanks. Appreciate that. All right. Minnesota with Karl-Anthony Towns. You also pointed out, hey, okay, Towns is one of the high-end options today. That doesn't necessarily mean he's a priority option. And if you pull up our ownership, he's the highest owned for this team on DraftKings, but only like 11.8%. Is Minnesota a team that you think you can actually get to today, whether it be Towns or somebody else?
I think Towns is probably the easiest, especially on DraftKings, because he's $700 less than he is on FanDuel, but also obviously you can roster 2 centers, so the opportunity cost isn't quite as high. This should be a fast-paced game. Over the last month, Minnesota's 4th in pace. Memphis is 3rd. Memphis is also top 10 in defensive rating, and they've been one of the most efficient defensive teams all season long. But Towns isn't really a player that I'm too concerned about that. I mean, he does so much. Like he gets assists, he rebounds, he can score at the rim, he can score away from the basket. It's relatively tough to slow him down. And so I still like him here. It's just a matter of, being able to get him in the lineups. Like I think when you think about these top end options with Luka, with Giannis, and with Towns, when you pay attention to kind of what's available at their positions, Giannis is the one that really stands out as far as there not being a ton of forward options that you like. So Giannis is very, very easy to get to. At center, there's not necessarily that many glaring values, but there's like an entire mid-range of 5 or 6 guys where they could just very easily, each one individually could just really, really outperform their salary. And so there's a pretty good chance that one or two of them does. So the opportunity cost is a little bit higher. But if I can get to Towns, I do think he's a very high upside play here. He's averaged 34 minutes per game for the season, just shy of 1.5 fantasy points per minute. In his last game, he played 39.6 minutes against the Knicks. So clearly not facing any sort of, conditioning issues at this point following his COVID bout. So, I think Towns is a good play. Again, probably wouldn't be in my first lineup, but should be a little bit easier to get to on DraftKings.
Sure. And if you want to play Towns, you're not going to have any trouble getting to him at all on this slate. We're not even at some of these games yet that specifically one of them that's just going to open everything up. And I think once we get there, Adam, because we still have a ton of time, it could be a good conversation to actually not just discuss which players are solid, but ways to differentiate yourself from the field on a day where that game is going to be massively popular. So we'll be sure to do that as well. But first, let's get through these games and close out this Minnesota-Memphis one with the Grizzlies. Ja Morant, $6,800 on FanDuel. I asked Josh today, right? I said, one word, yes or no. Will Ja Morant, and some people who bought pretty expensive Top Shot moments would very much hope the answer to this is yes. Will Ja Morant ever be a superstar caliber player? I'll let you decide what superstar means, but I think we're on the same page.
I would say yes.
Really? Okay. Josh was snap no.
So I'm thinking in terms of like household name marketing, like constant highlight, when someone says to like a semi-casual like basketball fan, like, is Ja Morant good? Their answer immediately is like, yeah, he's great. I think that I don't think he'll be a superstar in the context of like top 5 NBA player.
Will he ever be an all NBA first teamer? That's the question right there.
No.
Second teamer.
I have no idea. Like, I don't know what distinguishes. I don't pay attention to it.
All right. Just curious,
I do not think he's as good as most people do, which is kind of why, in a way, why I said yes to the superstar question, because I was thinking of it in terms of like not analytics based superstar, but like just household name type superstar.
Would you rather have De'Aaron Fox or Ja Morant over the next 5 years?
That's a good question, I think.
That's a tough one, right? But De'Aaron Fox doesn't get any of the fanfare that Ja Morant does, even though he's been wildly productive this season and the Kings are playing decent basketball, right?
Yeah, and he's gotten better while Morant has not.
Yep, exactly. So I don't know. I just think it's one of those things where most people would be like, oh, definitely Morant, definitely not De'Aaron Fox. But yeah, I'd say Fox. And the chat's saying Fox too, like a lot of Fox in chat.
Like my answer would be Fox. I also know that I'm higher on Fox than most people. So
yeah, it's a fun conversation to have though. Well, 6,800. I don't care if he's a superstar or not. Very similar to, by the way, guys, wait till we get to Bledsoe. You're not going to like what I have to say about that washed individual, according to you in chat. Memphis Grizzlies, 6,800. Ja Morant, what do you think?
Way too cheap. I think that if he were given the role that he plays in Memphis's offense, if he were as good as people thinks he is, he would be like 9K or 9,500. He's priced, to be his current skill level, or probably even, a little bit worse than that. It's a great matchup against Minnesota. He's averaging like 33 minutes per game over the last month. He's averaged 1.15 DraftKings points per minute for the season. Usage percentage approaches 30%, assist percentage around 35%. Everything looks really good for him. I think 7,600 on DraftKings is fine. I think 6,800 on FanDuel is a really good price. The only thing that makes it tough is, again, you can only roster 2 guys. You have Jordan Poole for free. You have Bledsoe. You have Lewis. You have Luka at the top if you somehow can just forego all of the cheap point guards. So the opportunity cost is really high. But again, he's just so cheap that when I crunch top lineups, he's coming up a pretty good amount on FanDuel.
All right. Does Morant pretty much, does Memphis start and finish or start and end with Ja Morant here, or do you like anybody else?
In terms of priority plays, yeah, but I do think this is a team that you can look to in tournaments where you kind of mentioned it when you mentioned it when you said something about the Pelicans and Atlanta game, finding ways to differentiate from that game. And I'm not saying, not to go there, because obviously there's great plays, but you do have some guys on Memphis that are in a very good matchup against Minnesota and that are going to get a little bit lower ownership than they otherwise would because of that New Orleans game, and other games. But Jonas Valanciunas, a 1.35 fantasy point per minute guy that very likely plays around 30 minutes tonight. Kyle Anderson coming off of a really big game without Brandon Clark. Clark is expected back, but Anderson's still pretty inexpensive. Same can be said for Dylan Brooks. Like, he's a scoring dependent player with a very low floor because he doesn't do much else. But being a scoring dependent player against Minnesota at a cheap price tag is not the worst spot to be in as long as he's low owned. And then also D'Anthony Melton, if Grayson Allen is out, he played 22 minutes last game without Allen and Winslow. I think that's kind of I don't want to say floor, but it's towards the lower end of, I think, his minutes range. If Allen is out here, because if he comes in and plays well, which is very likely against Minnesota, he can take minutes from Desmond Bane. He can take minutes from, Kyle Anderson. He can take minutes from a number of guys, and he's averaged well over a fantasy point per minute this year. So any of those guys, they're not going to be in my cash lineup. I haven't made it yet, but I feel pretty confident saying they're not going to be in my cash lineup. But in tournaments, if you're looking for a high upside guy that doesn't have a ton of ownership, I think you can look outside of Morant to these Memphis guys.
All right, good stuff. Moving on to Chicago and Utah. Hey, we got 1,500 people watching. I know baseball season, 1,600. I know baseball season's here, but still, don't forget to show us some love if you like the show. It helps us greatly. Hit that thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Join a wonderful community. You're not going to regret it. Yeah, hit that. Get us at least to like 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 900. I mean, whatever you guys feel is in your heart today, we'd appreciate it. We're about like 220 right now. Chicago and Utah, the Chicago Bulls are going to get smoked tonight. It's pretty much that simple. 12.5-point dogs, 225 total. Zach LaVine, Kobe White, both questionable. So I don't know. This is like, what does the line move to if these guys are out? Josh and I speculated it could go to damn near 17, 18 points.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. I think it'll probably go to about 15.5. That's my guess. 15.5 if LaVine is out. But do you think
12
he plays
right now?
What's up?
And it's 12 right now.
12.5 right now.
Okay.
I think 3 points. Do you think LaVine plays, Kobe White plays, or are we just kind of riding this one out until we get the news?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything you can really do until we get the news. My guess would be that they don't, just because it didn't sound, even though they were both questionable last game, it didn't sound like either one was particularly close to playing. Now you have a game at Utah that, you're kind of going to get your asses kicked one way or the other. I assume they don't, but again, I'm not going to build lineups assuming they don't, because then I can just end up in a really, really ugly spot. It is nice this game starts the same time as the Pelicans game because, at least you'll have a lot of roster spots available to kind of optimize your lineups. But also, with this being a matchup against Utah, obviously if LaVine and White are out, it's going to make a lot of guys on Chicago look better, but they still have plenty of bodies. They ran a 10-man rotation without them. A 9-man rotation without them against Phoenix last game, but it's still a tough matchup with Utah. It's still probably not going to be guys that I'm really prioritizing on the main slate.
Miami Mike 305 is a man with conviction, a man that knows what he knows. He just super chatted us $50 to say, I'll take Tyler Hero over Ja Morant.
Ooh.
Listen, first of all, appreciate you, Miami Mike. That's awesome. Appreciate that. But I'm not taking Tyler Hero over Ja Morant.
Yeah, speaking of guys that I think people think are way better than they are, I think Hero's got a high ceiling. I think he can be good. I think Morant is already better and has a higher ceiling.
Yeah, but hey, we appreciate it. And hey, I mean, you want to send us $50, you could tell me that Jonas Valanciunas is better than Joel Embiid, and I'll say, hey, there might be a chance. What are you doing?
I'll just argue against it and be an ass, but
I know. Well, no, you won't, because you don't look at the chat. Any other thoughts from Chicago?
No, I mean, there's really not much to say, without knowing that news. If LaVine is in and White is in, I don't really have interest in anything. It's a tough matchup against Utah. Obviously, Vooch takes some stats away from LaVine. LaVine takes some stats away from Vooch, compared to his time in Orlando. Satoransky is not really someone I'm super excited to get to against Utah. If they're out, Satoransky looks a little bit better. He played 30 minutes against Phoenix. Still not super exciting. Lauri Markkanen started and played 34 minutes. He had been coming off the bench previously. I'm still there's nothing that stands out to me here. Obviously, if they're both out, the guys starting look a little bit better. One thing I did want to mention is Patrick Williams is 3,600 on FanDuel. Not something I'm excited about, but someone that has played at least 31 minutes in 5 of his last 6 games probably shouldn't be minimum salary at small forward.
Chat brings up a good point. His name is Miami Mike.
I caught it.
Yeah, now it all makes sense. TJ, thank you for the super chat. Says, I would have taken Hero and a second for Kyle Lowry. I can tell you that for free or for $5. Hero and a second. So basically just Hero for Lowry.
I mean, why not?
Yeah, sure.
Miami, I don't think would do it, but
no, I don't think so either.
If they would have done it, it probably would have been done.
If they were like win right now, I could actually see that making a little bit of sense. Kyle Lowry's a scrappy defender and a good all-around player. What are your thoughts on Utah tonight? Donovan Mitchell, after the whole afraid of flight thing, is going to play. It's a home game. How'd he get home?
He didn't go.
Well, I thought they were in the plane when it almost went down.
Well, they were, and they returned to the airport, and then
they returned to their own airport.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was like 20 minutes after takeoff. They returned to their own airport. We're told to get on another plane, and Mitchell was like, "I'm not going."
Okay, I wasn't sure if they had to like emergency land at another one, and he just got caught in like Wichita, Kansas.
Yeah, no, they just turned around and went back
and hitchhiked home. Okay. Do you like anything from Utah?
I think Rudy Gobert stands out the most. Mitchell's still pretty expensive. Conley is priced up a little bit from the game without Mitchell. Gobert is just kind of there. Like, he's averaged 32 minutes per game over the last month, which is nice because early in the year you were getting 29, 30 minutes. I think that can be attributed in part to Utah hasn't been quite as good defensively, so they haven't been in quite as many blowouts. But also I think Utah kind of coming into the season thought Derek Favors was going to play a bigger role and be better than he has been. So I think maybe you're just seeing a little bit more playing time for Gobert because they don't really care about getting Favors on the floor anymore. So both of those are good. He's averaged close to 1.3 DraftKings points per minute this year. I think he should have plenty of success against Chicago. The only concern is the blowouts. But again, that's also just baked into his average playing time. So, if you're expecting around 32 minutes from Gobert, he projects as a pretty good option, I think.
Okay. But mostly this game, at least on the Utah side, doesn't do a whole lot for you.
Yeah, it's just, I don't find the pricing particularly appealing for Utah outside of Gobert.
All right. I mentioned once we got more people in the room, I'd tell you about the promo we've got going on. I know we're talking basketball, but it's baseball season as well. And it's an extremely fun sport, especially and I don't say this because I'm part of Awesemo. I say this in sincerity because I see so many people win with the Awesemo tools playing MLB. And I've seen Alex Baker, Awesemo himself, go on some of the most insane baseball runs you'll ever see using the tools that we have on the site. Gene took down 20K just yesterday as a part of the Awesemo community. We have projections, ownership projections, my favorite, and I think the most important tool out there in the industry, the top stack tool, taking all different probabilities into account. The value of a team, the ownership, how that compares to everything, what the leverage is on that. And what's the other thing I'm missing? Ownership, Adam, ownership, value, and what's the other one?
Optimal percentage.
What's that?
Optimal lineup percentage.
Optimal lineup percentage. All of that stuff. So it's amazing. And the top pitchers tool is pretty incredible as well. All of that stuff for $9 for 9 days. Starting 9 is the promo code. STARTING, number 9, all one word at awesemo.com/promos. Get you 9 days for $9. All the tools built by the number 1 ranked DFS player. All of the pros on the site answering your questions in premium Slack chat, office hours, an awesome community that you would probably be pretty happy to be a part of. And you're getting the third of a month for only $9. All of our Awesemo Plus MLB content starting 9. Go to awesemo.com/promos. All you got to do is hit that button. So, all right, let's keep it going then. We got, here we go. Atlanta, New Orleans, 4 games to go. We could do the remaining 25 minutes on this. Let me catch my breath. Atlanta 1.5 point dogs, 213 total. This total dropped from 222.5. Trae Young out. Danilo Gallinari out. John Collins out. DeAndre Hunter out. On the other side, Zion Williamson out. Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, all of them out. Massive, massive absences from both sides. Let's start with the Hawks. And you tell me why Bogdan Bogdanović is going to have a monster game today, because I think he is.
I mean, he should. He's played 179 minutes this year without Trae Young, without John Collins. He's actually been pretty productive. 1.02 DraftKings points per minute, 25.5% usage rate, 17.8% assist percentage. Overall this year, he's been pretty disappointing in Atlanta, especially from a fantasy standpoint. But, you take Trae Young's usage off the floor, you take John Collins' usage off the floor, there's ball handling opportunities for him now as well. Bogdanović, I think, looks really good. He's another, he is small forward eligible, small forward only, obviously, on FanDuel, but that makes him a little bit more valuable as well. You should get plenty of minutes. He played 45 minutes, including double overtime last game. So he played about 35 in regulation. Playing time had been up in general. As long as they don't come out, as long as they don't limit him because of the back-to-back and the double overtime game, I don't really see anything that doesn't make him one of the, a top play from Atlanta.
Okay. Pulling up ownership. This is where it gets important. Let's see where the field is going to be right now. Bogdanovich on DraftKings is 31.4%. On FanDuel, Bogdanovich is, where are we at, Atlanta? 35%. Then Clint Capella comes in second after that, right? Kevin Huerter on DraftKings getting a little bit of love, but despite all of these absences, all of these guys sitting tonight, big names too, right? No one else is really getting any attention for the Atlanta Hawks.
Did you say Lou Williams?
Lou Williams is like 7%.
He's a guard, but that still seems low.
Yeah, it seems like, I guess the question is, how many minutes does he get? He had a sick pass yesterday in his debut as well. I don't know if you saw that under the basket.
He played 22 minutes yesterday. Like, I would assume he plays at least 24 today. And
I thought so too. He's really cheap too.
Potentially more.
He's not expensive.
No, he's 4,400. What it comes down to is he has to compete with Bledsoe. He has to compete with Kira Lewis. He has to compete with, the actual good guards. He has to compete with Alexander Walker. So, yeah, I guess low ownership makes sense, but
who on his own team does he have to compete with other than Bogdanovich is the question.
Right. He's going to shoot the ball a million times.
And he's going to be set up as a passer too. Tony Snell is not going to bring the ball up the court.
Yeah. The only people that are going to handle the ball with him, that matter are Kevin Huerter and Bogdanovich.
Right.
But Clint Capella can be his Montrezl Harrell from the Clippers days.
Yeah. I don't know if Lou's really going to be that low owned. I think there's merit to taking him into consideration for sure. And just because he wasn't playing big minutes in LA or big minutes on back-to-back doesn't mean that he can't get a little bit of extra burn today. 22 minutes with Trae Young and Bogdanovich in yesterday, or I'm not Bogdanovich. I'm saying, sorry, with Trae Young in, it, to me, seems like a spot that could be taken advantage of. It's risky, just like Aldridge was yesterday, and I totally missed that. I didn't think he'd get those minutes at all, and he did. And he was
I think that's the point here. Like, the most likely outcome, I guess, for Lou Williams is probably that he plays 24 to 26 minutes. But if he wants to play big minutes and the Hawks are like who's going to keep him off the floor if he's conditioned and wants to play? Like, what are they going to do? Say, nah, we need to play, Tony Snell more, or we haven't cared about playing Brandon Goodwin all season, but we're going to play him ahead of you. Sorry. If he wants to, why can't he play 30 plus minutes and shoot, 30 times?
Right. Exactly. And by the way, one other thing on Bogdanovich, it's pretty clear that Nate McMillan is still toying with these rotations. And 2 games ago, Bogdanovich played 37 minutes against Phoenix, had his best game of the season. And then he followed it up with 45 minutes. Of course, I think 35 in regulation. It goes to show me, though, that even if everyone was healthy today, he'd probably still be getting a decent amount of minutes. His price came up a decent amount on FanDuel. I understand that. But it looks like McMillan is really liking what he's seeing from him right now, and Bogdanovich is rewarding him with some really good games. So if he played 38 minutes again today in regulation, 35, 37, 38, it wouldn't shock me at all.
Yeah, I wrote up Bogdanovich when I thought Trae Young was playing.
Right, exactly. Right, sure. Especially in this matchup against the Pels. Now, it's a low total because there's just no good players left on either side. Before we move to the Pels, is there anything else from Atlanta that you want to touch on?
Clint Capella. His minutes have been up lately because of John Collins' injury. You've seen, Collins playing a bunch of backup center minutes this year. And now with him out, you're getting Capella going from his 27 or 28 minutes to pretty regularly playing like 32 minutes, or at least, he played close to 34 in regulation yesterday. I assume you're getting another 33 or 34 here. I think Capella, he's been very, very productive when he's been on the floor this year. The only real issue has been playing time, but barring whatever concerns, whatever percent you want to put on him being limited because of the back-to-back, assuming he's playing his normal rotations, I think he's in a really, really good spot here.
Me too. So top options, Bogdanovich, Capella, and then some Lou Williams in tournaments?
Yeah, and Huerter in tournaments.
All right. How about the New Orleans Pelicans? No Zion, no Ingram, no Lonzo. Same as yesterday, except this time Josh Hart is also out. Adam, I just got into it with some people from chat yesterday because they were adamant. They proclaimed from the rooftops that Eric Bledsoe is washed, therefore you cannot play him, even though the three best starters from the team were out. I don't care if Bledsoe is not actually good anymore. What I care about is that Bledsoe is going to get way more opportunity than he has in previous games. Played 46 minutes yesterday. 46. Was his per minute production great? No, but his minutes were, and he did everything we needed. He was in the winning lineups across the industry. So I will go back and say the same thing once again. Who cares if he's not particularly good at real basketball anymore? As long as he's going to be one of the main options on this team tonight, and especially with Hart out, he certainly will. And his price has hardly climbed, only $200. Bledsoe makes a lot of sense once again, whether you hate him as a player or not. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points to make there. One, guys typically don't just fall off a cliff, especially when they're not really old. So you probably shouldn't just assume that Bledsoe is washed after being perfectly fine, in previous years. But also, think about who he's playing with and think about his skill set. He's a guy that can score, can rebound, and can get assists, but he's playing on a team where every guard is a good rebounder. Lonzo and Hart, especially. He's playing with Steven Adams, who rebounds. Zion rebounds. Ingram rebounds enough. Ingram gets assists. Lonzo gets assists. Zion's a massive usage guy. So is Ingram. What is Bledsoe supposed to do when everyone's healthy that would let him get fantasy points? He's just not going to be the leader in any of those stats when everyone's healthy. It doesn't mean he can't do it. And now, obviously, he gets a lot more opportunities with those guys out. He should play big minutes. And like you said, most importantly, he's just still really, really inexpensive.
Right. That's all it comes down to. Brandon McNeil says, don't waste your energy getting into it with these people, Lavi. Let them pay the rate. No, I mean, look, I get what you're saying, but I appreciate differing opinions. All I'm saying is we've seen countless examples for a long years. I could go back to 2014, 2013 of the same things being said. I'm talking from a DFS perspective, the same thing being said and people missing out on opportunities because they see it through a lens and they have tunnel vision and can't zoom out and see what you're actually dealing with here. Maybe he isn't good anymore, but the opportunity is too good. The conditions set forth in front of him are too good. And the price point is mirroring a player that isn't good anymore, except that player that isn't good anymore doesn't have any of the same players around him that he normally does that were the reason his price came down. So that's Bledsoe. With Hart out, man, it opens things up. It was already good, but now you have Alexander Walker again as a great play. And Kira Lewis Jr. is someone who played 33 minutes last night. He did not shoot well, Adam, but take Hart off the floor who started, and you could be looking at 35, 36 from Lewis today.
Yeah, and he's really, really cheap. And overall, he's been a decent fantasy producer this year. He's one of the only guys on the team that you actually get any sort of decent sample of minutes of him playing without Ingram and without Zion this year. Over those minutes, he's got a 23.4% usage rate. He's played 119 minutes. He's averaged 0.78 DraftKings points per minute. That's more than enough if you're getting 36 minutes from this guy at close to minimum salary.
Yep. See, I love this. There's some smart people in chat coming through with some pretty logical and, easy conclusions. Without Zion, without Ingram, without Lonzo Ball, let's talk about without Zion and Ingram for a second. James Johnson yesterday was egregiously owned, and I still went to James Johnson quite often. Did I get a little bit lucky? 17 actual points, sure, but who else do they really have? He's still minimum salary again today, Adam. Minimum salary, James Johnson on DraftKings.
Yeah, it's absurd. And he's small forward, power forward eligible there too, which is even better. There's again, I don't know how to get away from you. You mentioned it before, how do you, how can you get away from this game and be contrarian? And that's what gets really, really difficult about this time of year is ownership's going to be really high on guys like this, but they're also mispriced by such a wide margin that the chances of them not succeeding and the chances of them not succeeding and you finding someone at the price point that does better are just so low that it makes it really, really difficult. And, so I think you're still more likely to be able to do that with higher priced guys than cheap guys. There's just more likely, for example, I really like Nickeil Alexander-Walker tonight. I don't know how you wouldn't. You're more likely to find someone in the 6K range that has a better game than find a 3K guy that does better than James Johnson. I don't think it's very likely that either of those happen, but it's still, as a general rule, it's a little bit less risky to get away from guys the more expensive they get. But it's in general just really tough to get away from anything here because they have to play huge minutes. The salaries didn't adjust at all for these guys being out. There's not a whole lot that you can do without basically just saying, I'm cool with losing 100% of my buy-ins tonight, but I'll win if the game gets canceled or something.
Right. But it's actually a really good point. Basically, a two-step process here is, all right, I don't want to play them because they're chalky. But secondly, and most importantly, or equally important, is, all right, fine, who is your alternative at a price point as insane as this one?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, you were talking about the boom bust tool before. That's where it's really useful because you get the optimal lineup percentage. So it gives you something to compare it to. Like if you tell me that James Johnson is 60% owned, that number doesn't mean anything to me. If he has an 80% chance of being in the best lineup, that means he's too low. If he has a 20% chance, it means he's way too high. So that's definitely one of the easiest ways to kind of get an idea on how exactly you should be approaching stuff like this, because it's definitely not as simple as just saying he's popular, I need to do something else.
Yep. Okay. I like it. Close out the Pels for me in priority order.
Alexander Walker, Bledsoe. I guess James Johnson would be the number one priority because he plays the weakest position and he's minimum salary.
Yeah, sure.
Then I'll say Alexander Walker, Bledsoe, Kira Lewis, and then Steven Adams, Wesley Wundu are both fine, but they don't look quite as good as the other four.
All right. My God, what an insane slate this is, particularly with this game. We got 12 minutes to go. We just hit on the most important one. Let's talk about Milwaukee and Portland. This game total went from 236 all the way up to 240 right now. Milwaukee 3-point favorites. Is there something you really like from the Bucks or the Blazers side today? Feel free to hit on this game from both angles. I'll shut up.
I like Giannis here. I mean, he's been really disappointing. He hasn't scored 50 DraftKings points in any of his last 4 games, but those were 2 games against Boston, a game against the Clippers, a game against the Lakers. Not exactly the same defensive reputation for the Blazers here. The least efficient defense in the league over the last month. Also the 8th most points allowed in the paint over that time. I think this is a spot where Giannis bounces back. And most importantly, the 4 positions aren't quite as strong. You can also roster him at center on DraftKings, and you have to get raw points somewhere. Your options as far as pay up guys, are Luka against the Knicks, Giannis against the least efficient defense in the league, or Towns against a top 10 defense in Memphis. So, while I like Luka and I like Towns, I think Giannis is the one that stands out for me. You certainly can look to other guys, Drew coming off another monster game. Middleton always has a high ceiling, but Giannis is really the one that stands out.
Does it kind of feel like wasted value on it today where you've got all these cheap options and there's no one you really feel great about up top?
Yeah, it just feels like one of the slates where like you're going to plug in the guys you really like and then you're going to have like $8,000 left.
Yeah. Who are your favorite top tier options? I'm just like, look, yeah. As you were speaking, I was building something just to see what it would look like if I manually plugged a couple of these players in. And I went Lou Williams, Bogdanovich, James Johnson, Kira Lewis Jr., just to see what I had available. I mean, I got 8,300 per player remaining for my last 4 players. And there's still value plays that I haven't touched yet that I could put into this lineup.
Yeah. Like that's kind of the thing I built. The most recent lineup I built was before the Trae Young news. And I had Giannis. I have 3 like 6 to 7K guys, and then I filled it in with value. But now you have even more value because of Atlanta. So this is one slate, or I mean, most slates like we talk about. If you can play the maximum number of lineups in whatever contest you're in, you naturally have an advantage over people that can't. A slate like this really shows why, because if you're someone that plays like 5 lineups in a 150 max tournament, you're at a really big disadvantage to someone who's playing 150 lineups, not because they can cover every base and automatically win, but because they can say, okay, there's a million good plays in this price range. I can, basically just lock in my favorite pay up options and then rotate through a bunch of different combinations of these other guys and not have to be perfect. So it does kind of just go back to, it's not saying that you shouldn't play tournaments if you can't play 150 lineups, but you should be prioritizing tournaments where, it's 20 entry max or 3 entry max or whatever, so that you're not just putting yourself at a disadvantage against other people.
Yeah. Well put. Anything else for either side of this one?
The Portland side, I don't think anything stands out. So one thing I will mention, this is kind of an interesting game stack, like because of how high scoring this game could be, and because outside of Giannis, nobody here is really a priority. I don't typically force game stacks, but if you wanted to go to one here, like there's enough value, you could go, McCollum, Lillard, Giannis or something, and then fill it in with value and have a kind of unique lineup. So that's something to keep in mind, but nothing that really stands out for me outside of Giannis individually.
All right, so let's talk about the Lakers in Sacramento then. You got the LA Lakers, no Davis, no LeBron, Andre Drummond with the toenail thing, 4.5 point dogs, 220.5 total. Is there anything from the Lakers that you like today against the Kings?
Yeah, there's a lot. Kuzma, Harrell, Schroeder, all three. They've been good without LeBron and without Davis. I thought Drummond coming in would be an issue, but obviously he lasted less than one game. So you have Kyle Kuzma, who's averaged about 35 minutes per game. He gets a good matchup here against Sacramento. His rebounding numbers have been great in the games without James and without Davis. He's got about a 14.5% rebounding percentage, and obviously the usage increases as well. So I think he looks good. Montrezl Harrell's averaged about 31 minutes per game in those games. His salary came down a little bit with the addition of Drummond. Obviously, that's not a concern now, so you should get back to around 30 minutes from Harrell in a matchup against a Kings front court that shouldn't really be doing anything to keep him off the floor. And then Dennis Schroeder looked a lot better earlier in the day than he does now just because of all the guard value. But he is another one where it's just going to make it kind of tough to roster, for example, Luka at guard, because it's just another mid-range guard at a pretty cheap salary in a really, really good spot.
What about the Kings, De'Aaron Fox and the normal characters here on this Kings squad, all of them priced, I guess, at a point that is going to make it probably a little bit more difficult to confidently get there, and ownership would tell the similar story. The Kings have nobody above 9% on DraftKings. On FanDuel, Therese Halliburton up there around 13%. He's the only one garnering much love at all.
I think Fox is like the guard version of Julius Randle and Domantas Sabonis. If you get the Fox, it's cool because he's one of the only guys that can score 55 or 60 fantasy points. But the problem is, in his case, the opportunity cost is so high because it means that you're losing out on one of those other guards. So it should keep his ownership down in tournaments. It is still a tough matchup, though, against the Lakers. They've defended well, even without Davis, even without LeBron. So the biggest argument I would make against Fox is that it does just cost you one of these other guards, and it ends up being such a low probability play because you need so much to go right. Like, you need Fox to have that big game, but then you also need these guards to fail. And there's so many cheap guards that it's pretty unlikely that, they all fail. So Fox, if somehow you get him in the lineup that you like, I think he's fine, but it's tough for me to get to anything else. Halliburton's priced a little bit better on FanDuel than DraftKings, but still doesn't look like a priority. Everyone else's salaries have just come up enough to where I think there's a lot of better plays on the slate.
All right. 9 down, 1 to go, making pretty good time here. And for all of you hanging out with us right now, be sure to stick around for Live Before Lock. It's Chris Spags and Greg Ehrenberg coming up immediately after us, taking you all the way up till 7 Eastern time. And hey, when they show up, let's leave them with 500 likes. Let's drop off this stream and they start theirs with 500 likes. Make everyone's life a little bit easier. From me to you, it's greatly appreciated. And subscribe as well. But really, just hit that thumbs up. Let's get to 500. We can definitely do this. We got over 2,000 people watching on a Friday night. OKC and Phoenix to wrap up today's show and head into the weekend. The Thunder, 13-point dogs, 13 points, 220.5 total. Lou Dort out. And then all of the guys that are always out for the Oklahoma City Thunder are also out. Got about 5 minutes to hit on this game. Maybe we can wrap up with some final thoughts because I don't even think it'll take us that long.
Yeah, I don't think it will either. From the OKC side, there's a few guys that look a little bit better on FanDuel. Isaiah Roby's $700 less expensive at power forward. That's obviously better. Svi Mikhailuk is $3,700 on FanDuel, which kind of just makes no sense. But still, not going to be too excited about those guys. It's not a very good matchup against the Suns. They've been one of the most efficient defenses all year. It's not like Svi Mikhailuk's a great fantasy producer. Isaiah Roby has been fine, but he is hurt a little bit by the addition of Tony Bradley. You're not getting backup center minutes for Roby anymore, so you're still probably getting around 32 minutes, but they should be a little bit less productive. Moses Brown's gotten to a price point where, could he put up a monster game still? he can. But the issue that I run into with Brown, aside from, the matchup against Phoenix, is that he has very similar playing time concerns to other guys in this price range, like Robert Williams, like Jonas Valanciunas, like Clint Capella, for example. And while Brown produces at a high rate, 1.22 DraftKings points per minute in his starts, he doesn't produce at as high a rate as any of those other guys. Williams is around 1.35 to 1.4. Valanciunas is 1.35 points per minute. Capella is in the same boat. So now you're getting this playing time volatility, and he's not even as productive a player as the guys around him. If the slate were a little bit smaller, maybe the ownership would push me towards Brown, but you're going to get low enough ownership on any of these other guys that it's not a really big deal for me. So just nothing from OKC really stands out unless, you want to punt shooting guard on FanDuel with Svi, or, you need a $5,400 power forward in Roby.
Okay. So I'm looking at the other side of this one, and
oh, sorry, hang on. One thing I forgot. Ty Jerome went from being out to questionable for the Thunder.
What impact does that make for you?
If he plays, it's just one more body to screw things up. It doesn't change much, though.
All right. So the Oklahoma City Thunder have just been one of those teams that, even despite a lot of these absences, there haven't been a ton of opportunity there. But Phoenix has been a team where they've played well. They win a lot of games. They score a decent amount of points, and they limit their opponent pretty nicely. Nobody's really stood out as a great option all year long. And honestly, if you just look at their averages, they're all good, but not great. And it feels like sometimes the price points get up to a point that's a little bit prohibitive. But maybe you can tell me whether that's right or wrong on a day like today, where they're huge favorites against a skeleton crew Oklahoma City Thunder team.
They seem like they've been one of the most efficiently priced teams all season long.
Yeah, for sure.
Devin Booker is still a high upside player because he has a 32% usage rate playing with Chris Paul, but the assists aren't really there. Paul's usage obviously goes down when he plays with Booker, and he's just priced up. He's been like a 1.15 fantasy point per minute guy this year, but he's priced to be that and more, at this point. So it's tough to get there. DeAndre Ayton's kind of been the only guy, or one of the only guys, that for a while was underpriced because his playing time had dropped off significantly. Now you're getting him back to 30 to 32 minutes most games, but the salaries jump back up, and he's in this price range where he'll play 30 to 32 minutes. He's 1.1 fantasy points per minute. You don't have to spend that much more money to get the guys that are going to play similar minutes and average 0.2 of a point more per minute. So it makes it tough to prioritize him. Mikal Bridges was someone I had some interest in earlier in the day, thinking that we would kind of be scraping the bottom of the barrel at small forward, but now you've had more stuff open up with the Pelicans being out, with the Hawks, being shorthanded. So there's just not much here that stands out to me. Yeah,
me neither. Well, we made pretty good timing today. What do you think about that, man? Coming in actually on time.
Yeah, pretty unusual. Might be the first time it's happened all year.
I think it actually is. And on a 10-game slate, no less. So I'll throw this final question to you. And by the way, appreciate you guys staying with us. As always, we love you here. Even when you make egregious comments in chat, you're still endearing yourself to all of us. Blue Ducks says, thanks for the content with the super chat. Y'all like Chris Paul or Morant tonight? We can leave.
I like Morant more. The price tag's just better.
Yeah. Okay.
And hey, if you want, the matchup is better.
If you want to join the YouTube, if you want to be a subscriber here or a member on YouTube, I think it's like $2.99 or something like that. You can do that by hitting join down below. It's pretty cool. You get the sweet badges. You get to use GIFs, or you get to use emojis of me and Alex and Ben and a bunch of other cool stuff. It's an exclusive feel here on the Awesemo YouTube channel. Do not go anywhere. Coming up next, it's Spags, it's Ehrenberg, live before lock. And thanks to our boy Tyler Zander for producing this one. We'll catch you back here tomorrow on the Deeper Dive.
What is up, guys? You got one more hour left until the NBA locks for the day, and I'm sure over the course of this hour, the crunch that I lovingly crafted while watching the deeper dive will be completely rendered meaningless, but that is the joy of it all. It's all about the process. I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man who is ready to help get through this with me, who just put in his MLB lineups because that's the kind of professional that he is. He's nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Yeah, really leaning into the nerd-ass angle because I got the glasses on, so I just didn't feel like putting in my contacts. But yeah, I mean, we've got an NBA slate. I'm going to be playing a lot of the same people I played last night.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of crossover with the Pelicans and also some fun Hawks value that we're going to hit on today. But this show is sponsored by really our own greatness at Awesemo. So make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. We are putting content out around the clock. Starts at 6:30 in the morning on the East Coast with Josh's process shows, and then goes all the way into all hours of the night with some new shows there. No more late slate show because of the MLB going on, but we did have a late MLB show with our new pal Gundacker showing up in late time. And my favorite name in DFS, so make sure you are watching any of the content and checking out some new faces as well. EMAC doing the new baseball show overnight with Harish, who's on there, and a lot of great guys who are getting in the mix, lots of sharp guys as well, helping to give you guys some great information. So make sure to check that out. And also make sure to also subscribe to our podcast. If you're not able to watch your favorite Awesemo shows besides this one on YouTube, almost all of them go to the podcast platforms because they have a little bit more of a shelf life than a Live Before Lock show. We have a podcast for every sport. And so all you got to do really is head over to awesemo.com/podcast. Check out the latest and the good news for you guys. If you leave a 5-star review on one of our podcasts with your Twitter handle or email address, you'll be eligible to win a free week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. So make sure to go subscribe to the podcast, go to awesemo.com/podcast and get your fix of any sport you want out there. Greg, let's talk about the slate though, because we got a lot of guys to.
We got news while you were talking, by the way.
Good. Just hit me with it.
Yeah, John Wall was ruled out.
All right. Well, cool. So that's going to change some things around for Houston. The last time that we saw Houston play, Kevin Porter Jr. was very popular. And I think to me, Greg, this is one thing we can talk about in the moment. For me, I like Kevin Porter Jr. a lot, was very bullish on him when he was a 3K guy. And I think still you can make the case for him in certain situations if he's at his current price. But Houston's now crowded enough in this rotation where it's not the same spot as when Kevin Porter Jr. had his ceiling games before. Even with Wall out, you still have Avery Bradley in there who is playing some quality harassing defense on James Harden that last game. But also you got some other guys in the mix like Kelly Olynyk, who assists fairly well. Danwell House back in the lineups. You have bodies here now that I think Kevin Porter Jr. is fine, but on the slate, I don't think he's going to take a huge jump upwards for me. But how are you feeling about him with this news now that John Wall is in fact going to be out?
All right. So Kevin Porter Jr. he's played a lot of his minutes this year with no Eric Gordon, John Wall, or Victor Oladipo on the court. He's played 153 minutes with those three guys off the floor, 29.4% usage rate in those minutes, scoring over 40 DraftKings points per 36 minutes. And his price, let's see, what is it? Like we were just starting. And as I was saying it, I was mentioning, I was like, well, John Wall's question, and you said, well, that's not going to change anything. And then it's like we just summoned the news. He immediately got ruled out right after that. So his price point, he is 6,500 on DraftKings. Yes, he's going to be my player pool. On FanDuel, he is, let's see, Kevin Porter Jr. on FanDuel is 6,000. He's going to be, he's a play for me. He's somebody who, based on these numbers here, I'm going to have to expect that he scores somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 to 40 fantasy points, most likely. And with where his price is at right now, that makes him a good play on both sides.
All right, I'm updating my minutes projection to give my official stance on how I'm going to feel about Kevin Porter Jr. today. And now here, let's do the calculate. Yeah, I'm not going to get to Kevin Porter Jr. very much. I would have him just shy of 30 fantasy points today, which Awesemo's number 31.7. So I don't feel like I'm in bad company here. I just think he's a guy that's getting a bit overvalued based upon some of those games he had when there was no Christian Wood out there, which I think is a big part. But having Wood, who's been a 26% usage rate guy on the year, is also rebounding at a high clip. Again, you do have Olynyk in there playing a certain amount. You have Bradley playing a certain amount. You have DJ Augustine, who also wasn't there for some of Porter Jr.'s best games. There's enough minutes going to these guys that I think Porter's got the ceiling for GPPs, but I think with the love that people have for him because of that run that he had earlier, and he's always been a guy that people liked even on Cleveland, I guess not his teammates or or the front office, but the DFS players and bettors enjoyed Kevin Porter Jr. then. But I just think this is a different Houston team now. And if people are going to play it like it's that same situation, I think I'd just rather would get away from Kevin Porter Jr. when you have Nickeil Alexander-Walker cheaper, you have Bledsoe cheaper, you have Bogdan cheaper, you have Herter cheaper, you have Lou Williams cheaper. Like, I think there's a lot of ways it can go, and maybe that's increases the Porter appeal, but I just don't see it with the projection that Awesemo's giving or the one that I have.
So something else that's going to matter is, let's see, do we have updated ownership projections? Because yeah, I agree with you. If he's super popular, then he becomes less appealing of an option. And I'm not going to roster him, at the expense of getting to some of those Pelicans guys. And also, I still need to rerun my lineup to see where I actually am going to get to him. But let's see if we have updated ownership, because I'm not sure he's going to be super popular. There's so many value plays on the slate. He wasn't bad in his last start, but he scored, was it 32 DraftKings points? And it's not like that's a terrible outcome. Here we do have updated ownership, by the way, and maybe not. It's updated from a minute ago, except Kevin Porter's only coming in with 1% ownership, so that's probably going to change. But yeah, I don't think he's going to necessarily be really popular, because I think the chalk is still going to be all in those Pelicans guys. It's not to say Porter's going to be unowned, but I expect he's going to be somewhere in like the 20% range. It's not going to be like other slates where he's been like 40 or 50%.
Okay, I think it's reasonable. And look, and I'm not going to besmirch Kevin Porter too much here, because I do think that he's a talented dude who definitely has an upside. But if this ownership to me, and I think just I'm kind of gauging it off of what I presume how this field's going to go, and also just seeing the YouTube chat immediately perk up and say they're going to lock Kevin Porter. I think that's going to be the mindset of a lot of people. And even with him busting the other day, my sense is he'll come up a lot higher when we get the next run of ownership here, because really nobody from Houston took a jump up. So I think this wasn't fully accounting for the Houston news yet. For me, I think, yeah, I just think Porter's going to be overvalued, but I guess we'll see what the ownership projections are. And then, maybe real life will surprise us, but that is why we rely on the ownership projections here. Speaking of, by the way, the ownership projections are not free today, but it is money time, because I'm back on a live before lock show. So in 21 minutes, I'll be flipping this very hat, giving you guys a top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel. So smash that like button now. It'd be great if you guys, all of you watching this video right now, over 2,000 people got us to 1,000 likes. Honestly, get us to 750. And I feel like we can give these top 5 away to you guys and not feel like we are fully whoring ourselves out. So make sure you hit that like button, and of course, subscribe to the channel, check out all the content. And we got a super chat from Gene B. Kim real fast, $11. We appreciate Gene on one of his hottest streaks, I feel like recently, that a guy who's won some historically in our community, which you can always join yourself at awesemo.com/join. He said, sorry, I didn't DM you, Greg. Stupid Justin Turner, LOL. I'm glad we now get chats just for your pals, your rich pals DMing you, Greg, but there it is.
Yeah, well, so Gene has been he's been asking me questions, and we've been chatting with each other on Twitter and whatnot since going back to like my basketball monster days of even when I first started there years ago. So I mean, Gene's somebody who I've been talking with on Twitter for a really long time, and whenever he has a sweat going, he usually DMs me. I DM him when I have some good lineups going, and then we commiserate when something goes wrong at the end. But yeah, it's become a little thing we've done for the last, I don't know, probably a couple of years or so.
Well, you want to be jealous, Greg. Gene tried to hang out with me one time in LA. We didn't quite match up, but I'm sure I could have stolen his heart there with my in-person charisma that could have easily dwarfed your DM charisma, I think.
Yeah, potentially, but I'm not. Listen, I love Gene, but I'm not going all the way to LA just to hang out with some of my DFS friends.
You will at some point. When everything's back to normal, Greg, you're going to be coming out here trying to hang out with me and Leslie and Jordan Frank and Eric Lindquist, your best friend, Eric Lindquist. You know the silly voices he does in person? They're even better, Greg.
Yeah, I can't wait for it. Yeah, so I've never rooted for COVID to last longer now.
Poor Eric. Can't even on shows he's not on. Let's talk about that was some breaking news for Houston again. John Wall out, so keep that in mind with your lineup building today, and we'll keep you guys updated on the ownership, and of course update you on the top 5 at the halfway point of the show. So smash that like button here. Let's just talk about the main event, because I honestly thought Adam and Lofty, deeper dive, part of my process as a host every day is to watch that show, understand what those guys are talking about, see if there's anything they're thinking differently compared to how I viewed things across my prep and some of the earlier shows that I do. And I think what they were talking about this game a lot, and I thought Adam and Lofty too made some really great points about value in this spot and the idea of James Johnson. Like, are you going to find anybody else at 3K who can do what he does? And I think there are a lot of compelling things, Greg, that would say just play the best guys in this game at pretty high volume. And I think that's where I was yesterday. That's where I'd be today. But I have to ask you one question, because we are in a spot where both these teams are coming off of overtime games, 2 overtimes in the case of Atlanta. And then for New Orleans, we have a couple guys who played upwards of 45 minutes. The one of them, Josh Hart, not available today. But does that give you any sort of concern here that maybe we see some guys that we don't even know are active dusted off and brought into the rotation? Or is something getting weird here? Because, these aren't the star players who played gigantic minutes, and the stars are out with Trae Young and all the New Orleans players being out. But it does give me some concern just seeing gigantic box score outlays of guys playing 40 plus minutes that maybe they get ramped down a little. I don't know how you do, particularly for New Orleans, but there feels like there could be some way they just get a little bit less today.
I'm more concerned about it on the Hawks side than the Pelicans side. I mean, maybe a little bit of concern with Eric Bledsoe, but like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Kira Lewis, James Johnson. James Johnson, by the way, didn't even play all that many minutes yesterday. Like these guys, I still think their minutes are going to be fine. I'm still playing Eric Bledsoe a ton, but he's also cheap enough to where, is Eric Bledsoe really going to play, like 18 or 20 minutes? I don't think so. And as long as he plays somewhere in the neighborhood of 30, given all the usage I expect to go to him, all the other guys that are out, I still think that Bledsoe would still be a good play in that situation. On the Hawks side, I'm a little bit more concerned. I did lower the minutes for Clint Capella a little bit. Guys like Bogdan Bogdanovic and him, I'm a little concerned that their minutes are not going to be super significant. Because don't forget, also earlier in the day, Trae Young and Clint Capella were both listed as questionable. After the game yesterday, the team did say to the media that they were going to mix some stuff up tonight to try to keep guys fresh after the long game they had. Now, it's hard to know, does that just mean Trae Young sitting out? Or does that also mean that Clint Capella plays, 28 to 30 minutes? That was enough for me to at least not have Clint Capella in like all my lineups, as he was kind of close to being when I ran my initial runs.
Yeah, Capella, I think too, going against Steven Adams it's not something, and it is a DVP thing to point out, but historically for me, I do have some apprehension just going against Steven Adams, because when he's going against a fellow kind of high upside rebounder, a guy whose really primary value is derived off of rebounds, his one job is basically to keep that guy off the glass. And I think that could open up more rebound opportunities for the guards on both sides. So I have some concern about Capella too. I think I'm going to end up under the ownership on him by a little bit. I know he just put up 60 fantasy points yesterday, but I would agree, a guy who's had like foot problems in the past, him playing over 40 minutes again seems pretty unlikely to me. And I guess that's one question I would ask, Greg, and I'm with you. I think Atlanta is the side that sort of can do something weird here that's unexpected. Would it shock you if we didn't see Lou Williams or Kevin Huerter start, and a guy like Nathan Knight or even Brandon Goodwin made it back in? Because we're missing the 4-man a lot with no Gallo, with no John Collins. That's a spot you really need to fill, where you have enough guards, I think, to get away with not having Trae out there. Is there just any concern for you, or any thoughts about anything weird that Atlanta might do today to try to switch up the rotation?
So, I mean, if they change the starting lineup, that's going to massively change everything I'm doing. Because then I have like uber concerns. Like right now I'm talking about I lowered Clint Capella's minutes by like 2, right? I didn't do anything like give Clint Capella 24 minutes or anything like that. It was just like, instead of assuming Clint Capella plays 36 minutes, which I think that's what I had him for last night, I don't remember off the top of my head, I gave him 32. So it's not like I'm totally nerfing his minutes. I still have Clint Capella in a big chunk of my lineups, but just I didn't want it to be where he's in 100% of my lineups. Yeah, if they go and do something like start Nathan Knight, then just everything gets overhauled, everything gets thrown out, which is probably going to happen for some other news reasons that happens at some point during the day anyway. But I don't think that's a likely scenario.
Do you think there's a chance that Brandon Goodwin could start and they can kind of keep the same rotation they had last game, but just putting Goodwin in for less minutes than Trae had, but just play him functionally in the same situation?
I think it's more likely to be Lou Williams than Brandon Goodwin that would play that role. Like I'm pretty significantly overweight to Lou Williams. He's the guy who, if I'm looking at this Hawks and Pelicans team, the guy who, and it's not like he's picking up no ownership today, but I think if I look at the price on him and the potential role he has without Trae Young there, I think he's the guy who has the most upside for the least amount of ownership.
And which Hawk would you be most concerned by? Because I will say, for me, if Kevin Huerter isn't starting, I have some concern that he does get squeezed and just kind of ends up playing the backup to either Lou or Bogdan or even Brandon Goodwin if he starts. Like, I have concern that he gets kind of messed up in the rotation because he's been playing behind Gallo and was sort of the backup for Gallo in some parts yesterday. And I do think if they change things up meaningfully, and you can play small against the New Orleans team who closed with 4 guards and Steven Adams yesterday. But I think for me, Herder's the one I have some degree of concern on. Awesemo has him in for 32 minutes, which I think gives me some ease in that concern. But who would you be most concerned by from the Hawks?
Let's see. Let me look at what the latest ownership is, and I'll see which guys. So I'm fairly significant underweight to the field on Bogdan Bogdanovic just because he's so popular and somebody who I think that his minutes aren't quite as secure as what the ownership suggests. Right now, he's in 15% of my lineups and he's 30% ownership. I still think you should play him in cash games, but that's definitely a concern for me with him because think how many games he's missed this year and how careful they've been with his playing time in some of the games where he's come back. He played 45 minutes last game. He played 37 minutes the game before. Before that, he was rarely ever cracking 30 minutes. Even in the last two starts before that, a start against the Warriors, he played 21 minutes. A start against the Nuggets, he played 23 minutes. And then all of a sudden, the last two games, he played 45 minutes and 37 minutes. That is so much playing time for a guy who was injured about a month ago and came back with a minutes restriction. Like he went from minutes restriction to playing nearly 40 minutes per game. So that is somebody who I have to be a little bit concerned about.
Yeah, I'm going to be the heaviest on Bogdan, I think. So I guess I'm going the other way. If you watched the tip-off yesterday, I made my declaration that I'm a Bogdan guy. And he has been somebody for me who I've always wanted to see do better. And I think coming to Atlanta, I had higher hopes for him kind of being that 1-2 punch with Trae Young in a way, or 1-2-3 punch with John Collins if he was going to be there long-term. He hasn't shown it yet. But the one thing with Bogdan for me that I think has jumped out when he was both on the Kings and kind of complained about his role there, same thing that he's done in Atlanta this year, he's a guy that wants to shoot a lot. And I think Bogdan kind of wants to show like, hey, this is my team when we do get Trae Young out. So my inclination is that I think he plays and I think his condition clearly, if he can play 45 minutes, is probably where it needs to be. But I think, I there should be more concern about his health potentially. And the main thing for me though, with this game, because Atlanta's playing New Orleans and because I like so many guys on that side, you still do have a couple games at the same time and a couple coming later. I really have no concern for playing a bunch of Hawks right now, because if we do get something weird that comes, I think I'm in good position to swap around. So how are you approaching that overall, Greg? Like, are you giving any thoughts to both these lineups could be overhauled, could do something weird potentially, especially Atlanta side, but is that something you're just going to be comfortable late swapping with whatever the outcome may be?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is we've had to late swap so much on recent slates. Like I'm always ready to make late swaps. Like if you're at this point of the season, if you are not making late swaps on any particular slate, you probably lost that night, right? Like, cause we just have weird things happening every day. Paul George went from out to playing. We've got guys who are just randomly getting late scratch with like Paul George with no real notice ahead of time. So we have to late swap every slate anyway. So I'm always ready to do it.
We also got some game time decisions for the Knicks. RJ Barrett, Derrick Rose, and Reggie Bullock are all game time decisions. And then for Indiana, Domantas Sabonis and Jeremy Lamb, also game time decisions. And Ricky Rubio was questionable, I think, right before we started the show. So just some more injuries that I guess we can talk about in a second here. But I think we need to talk some New Orleans on the other side. And again, guys, smash that like button. In 10 minutes, we're going to give away whatever the ownership is at that time, barring some weird news coming out. Going to give you guys the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel. But you got to do your part and hit that like button. Normally, you'd have to pay money for it. We're giving it to you for free. So smash that like button now. Get us to a respectable 750 likes, and then we can give you guys those plays and everybody feels good about themselves. We all win. One quick super chat from Chris Thomason that came through a little bit ago, but I want to make sure we talk about everything. He was asking Wood or Siakam, and I think that's one that we can hit on pretty fast here. For FanDuel in particular, Greg, do you have any lean between Wood and Siakam? For me, it would be Siakam.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy Siakam. I did up my projection for Christian Wood when John Wall got ruled out, and Wood went from somebody who was basically not really in any of my lineups to he's in them, but not a significant portion. I have him at right around 5% right now. But Pascal Siakam, core play for me tonight. No, with no Kyle Lowry there. Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet, both strong plays in both FanDuel and DraftKings. Fred VanVleet at 7,400, I think, is arguably the best play on the entire FanDuel slate. And then on DraftKings, I lean a little bit more towards Siakam just because VanVleet's a lot more expensive on DK.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I was getting more Siakam in my DraftKings crunches. So we'll see how that goes. And now that we got some different moving parts, but I think Siakam to me, a play that's going to be a little bit overlooked potentially. I guess the ownership is there enough, but to me just feels undervalued. And I think on FanDuel especially, I have great concern about people going to OG Anunoby today. And I mentioned this on the tip off earlier that game that he had last time out, there is nothing in the rate data that says that OG Anunoby should have been able to do that. And maybe he's reinvigorated by playing alongside Gary Trent. Maybe they're boyhood friends. I don't know. There's a million different ways that could be contributing to a guy like Anunoby. But Greg, I just don't see Anunoby having that day again. I don't see Trent having that day again. I think things reconsolidate here with Van Vliet and Siakam. But for Toronto, we're going to jump back to the Pelicans to make sure we cover that adequately before the halfway point of the show. But Van Vliet, Siakam, do you think these guys are really the core Toronto Raptors that you want to play today against Golden State?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, I don't have none of Anunoby. And he's only projecting for 8% ownership right now. So I'm not that much different than the field. 8% on DraftKings, 20% on FanDuel though. So that's a pretty significant number, but like, I don't think 8% on DK is a crazy number at all.
I don't think it's a crazy number. I think the 6,800 for him is a crazy number.
I think it's about reasonable. I mean, look at his fantasy point totals over the last, 2 weeks now, 34, 34, 41, 33, 38, 37, 49. He hasn't scored under 32 fantasy points since late-ish February. Like, it's been a while since he had a not good game.
Yeah, I get it. I guess, pointing out the box score numbers, I do try to deliberately avoid trying to get sucked into those box score traps, but maybe there's something more there that I'm giving credit for. I just feel like for me, I have him around 30 fantasy points, and at that price point on DK, I don't think it's usable. Awesemo has him for 35.7, which I think is interesting because he's pulling production from somebody in Awesemo's projection because my projections for Van Vliet and Siakam are pretty close to where Awesemo has him, so I'm not sure who he's yanking away from to get to a little bit more for Anunoby, but I'm just not a big OG believer because I think really any of these guys can seize usage away from him. And if he doesn't rebound well, and he's not been the best rebounder in the year, only a 10% rebound rate, which is worse than Siakam, I just think that his numbers kind of become more pedestrian, but the box scores are there. So I'll give you that.
Are you high on Boucher maybe, or at least higher than most other people?
No, I got him at 24.3. Awesemo has him at 25.8. I'm honestly not sure what the discrepancy is because I'm going through the projection. I have a little more for Stanley Johnson, like 1.4 more fantasy points, but like I'm 6 points short on Anunoby, and I'm not particularly sure why.
So the other thing too is I just think he plays a ton of minutes. Like this is basically an 8-man rotation. It's Siakam, Van Vliet, Anunoby, Gary Trent, Chris Boucher, Aaron Baines, DeAndre Bembry, Stanley Johnson. I mean, Malachi Flynn and Yuta Watanabe each playing 5 minutes, but for the most part, there's only 8 guys playing significant minutes. So Anunoby is somebody who most nights I think plays in the neighborhood of 40 minutes.
So that may be the difference between yours and mine. But Awesemo has Malachi Flynn getting 17 and Yuta Watanabe getting 9. So I think for me, that could be why I'm a little bit lower in Anunoby, but it still doesn't make sense because he's obviously using his own minutes projection for OG and getting a better number. So I don't know. It could be something off there. I could be the one in the wrong. But from how I put things together, I don't see Anunoby being a guy that to me deserves any ownership at that price point. But hey, I'm willing to be proven wrong. It happens once or twice, I guess, in a given year. New Orleans, back to them before we talk about ownership in 5 minutes. Smash that like button, guys. Help us out here. We're competing against so many other channels out there. Some of them have been around forever, some of them doing different things, but either way, we are here for you guys every single day, every single sport. So smash that like button on this show and really any Awesemo show because it helps us out a bunch. New Orleans, Greg, what are the priorities for you? For me, I think tying into our earlier conversation, James Johnson is the priority for me just because where else are you going to get a 3K player who projects for just shy of 30 fantasy points? But I think besides that, Bledsoe remains a priority for me. I think Kira Lewis is now slightly higher priority than Nickeil Alexander-Walker because he's so cheap and he should pick up some of that Josh Hart run was basically playing backup to him part of yesterday alongside Wes Iwundu. Both those guys came in for Hart at different points. But what's the priority for you for New Orleans? And I guess if you wanted to rank these guys to start it off, you could.
So first, let's go over what I think their starting lineup is going to be because they have almost everybody out. So right now, I assume it's going to be Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Eric Bledsoe, Kira Lewis, James Johnson, and Steven Adams. So basically the same lineup as yesterday, but no Josh Hart, and I have Kira Lewis in their form now. Potentially, it could be Wes Iwundu who starts instead of Kira Lewis, so that might force me to change some things up. But for now, James Johnson, Kira Lewis, they're kind of the top options. Then it's Eric Bledsoe, and then a little bit of a drop-off in Nickeil Alexander-Walker. But all 4 of these guys are in a very, very significant chunk of my lineups.
Yeah, so same page for me. I think Iwundu has a higher possibility of starting than Kira Lewis, just because I think you would want to have that one ball handler coming off the bench to then cycle through Bledsoe, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and Kira. I think it's also Kyra Lewis, somebody was saying in the chat earlier. I believe God Shamgod was saying that. So if it's Kyra, then there you go. You got to pronounce right. In my mind, it's Kira. I feel like that works for me. But Kyra Lewis, Kira Lewis. In this spot, I think, to me, it's hard to see him not playing 30 minutes. Awesemo has him in for 31. He got over 30 yesterday, including overtime. And I guess the one thing that could be lending credence to him starting, Greg, was that they did close overtime with 4 guards out there, was Bledsoe, Alexander Walker, Kira, and Josh Hart alongside Steven Adams. And I guess if you had to rate it, if you had to give that a possibility here, what do you think the potential is for that being the starting lineup?
Whether Lewis or Wundu starts, I think it's pretty close to 50-50. I just did it Lewis for now because I like how my DFS lineups I like the look of them better with Kira Lewis, just because I think that he's a much better fantasy player than Iwundu. So I want it to be Kira Lewis. So therefore I'm setting up my lineups as if it's going to be him. If it isn't, then I'll have to adjust. But I mean, Iwundu, we've seen him get extended minutes a handful of times in his career. He's not a very good fantasy producer. This year, he is playing 12.5 minutes per game and scoring 6.35 DraftKings points. So that is pretty miserable. He's also made 3 starts this year. In those starts, he's averaging 26.5 minutes and 12.7 DraftKings points. So I hope it's Lewis, because I think there's a lot more upside and better value there if it is him starting.
Kira was a guy that I talked about on some show yesterday, and people I think are generally surprised by Kira Lewis. So some people maybe who follow the team more closely or just Lewis fans, Lewis stands even out there, maybe know better, but he's been a 20% assist rate guy on the year, 18%, 19% usage rate actually. So these are really good numbers for a guy picking up some usage here. One guy I have to ask you about, because it did jump out when I was going through everything, and I have backed Eric Bledsoe. And Greg, you are the preeminent resource on backing Eric Bledsoe, having declared him the best player your eyes have laid on since Michael Jordan. I think that's a brave take, but one I wouldn't necessarily agree with. Either way, though, I think he's not washed. He did have a 15% usage rate in that 45 or 46 minutes he played yesterday. Is there any cause for concern at all that Bledsoe just stays on the court, but stays on the court slightly less than yesterday and still doesn't do a whole lot? Because he also had 4 stocks in that game, and that could happen again, but it's not the highest possibility outcome to be depending on.
Yeah, I mean, bold of you to say that Eric Bledsoe is a better player than Michael Jordan. But hey, I mean, whatever. We're all fans of him in these parts, but yeah, I mean, so there's definitely parts of what he did yesterday that are not sustainable. I don't think he plays 46 minutes again. I don't think he is 4 steals plus blocks again, but I still think that the most likely outcome is he plays really significant minutes. It's a favorable matchup against, whatever's left of this Hawks team. Like, to me, this is about the same matchup he had yesterday, right, against the Magic, because the Magic were playing a lot of backups. The Hawks are going to be playing a whole bunch of backups. These teams are both going to be ridiculously tired. They both played overtime games yesterday. So I think we have to consider this a pretty easy matchup for Bledsoe. And just because the price hasn't had time to adjust from yesterday to today, I still think that even if he's not somebody who's going to score, 45 fantasy points, which is something we saw him do fairly regularly a couple of years ago, he doesn't have to in this kind of matchup at this price point.
We also got news while Greg was talking there. The Knicks, the guys who were game time decisions a mere 15 minutes ago, available to play. RJ Barrett playing, Derrick Rose playing, Reggie Bullock playing. Greg, I don't think we had enough time to even adjust the potential of them not playing, but how does them playing change things for you?
Nothing. So if these guys were out, then I would say there's Knicks value we actually have to consider. With them playing, the guys are about fairly priced. So nothing really to see here because there's so much value on the slate.
Yeah, I probably would have gotten a Randle if those guys were out and Alec Burks. Now I'll probably get to no Knicks based on what I'm viewing things as. And we are at the halfway point of the show, so it's time to flip this little hat and do our version of money time on here. So smash that like button, guys. Tyler's going to get to the sound effect whenever he gets time. He's too busy messing up the sidebar on the deeper dive and getting called out for it.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Did you not see that, Greg? It was very funny. Tyler's anxiety levels, I know, for doing Lofty shows, always sky high. We keep it casual and cool here, but when Lofty was calling him out for it, I could feel Tyler dying inside and the abject fear injected into his heart.
No, I was trying to get my baseball lineup.
Yeah, he called Chicago Charlotte was the issue, which, who makes that mistake? Only Tyler.
Yeah, I mean, what's the difference? Just two premier American cities, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Chicago, Illinois. Like, what's the difference? They both, they start with the same letter. It's the same thing.
Queen City, Windy City. It's all the same.
Yeah.
Actually, is Cincinnati the Queen City? No, it's Charlotte's the Queen City, right? Yeah, that sounds right. Somebody in YouTube chat will tell us, I'm sure, and angrily yell that their city is the Queen City. Top 5 owned on DraftKings. Smash that like button here, guys. We didn't get to 750, but I believe in you like you believe in us by watching this show. So hit that like button now and get us to 750 here while I give out the ownership for DraftKings and FanDuel. Top 5 on DraftKings. James Johnson, number 1 at 77%. Number 2, Kyra Lewis, 47%. Number 3, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, 42%. Number 4, Eric Bledsoe at 37%. Number 5, Bogdan Bogdanovic, 32%. Greg, now that I've read these names out loud and basically revealed 5 parts of every lineup I'll have today, how are you feeling about these guys, and is there one you'd move away from?
Not move away from, but I mentioned before, I have a lot less ownership to Bogdan Bogdanovic than that number, just because I have a little bit of concern about what his playing time is going to be. But then also that I'm a little higher on the Pelicans. Like, I'm just playing the Pelicans chalk for the most part. And with that in mind, if I'm going to be overweight to the field on these guys who are already really popular, I'm starting to run out of lineup spots then. And just Bogdanovic is somebody who, like I said, I have him in, let's see, what did he come out in now my latest run? So now I have him at 20%. So that's less than the field. It's just hard for me to get to that number when I'm really prioritizing the Pelicans plays.
That's reasonable. And yeah, Bogdan, I have some concern that I'm going to be with 32% of the field on a guy who has had some games where the usage didn't go up, but he was fantastic in the last 2. I'm hoping it gets up a bit more, but I will be playing a lot of Bogdan along with you guys. And honestly, these 5, I'm not going to be under the field on any of them. I think my build is going to be hoping to get more than everybody else out there. We'll see how that goes for me. On FanDuel, the top 5, Nickeil Alexander-Walker at 47%, James Johnson, number 2 at 42%, Fred VanVleet, number 3 at 39%, Bogdan Bogdanovic, number 4 at 32%, and number 5, Giannis, 29%. All those names look great to me. Giannis, a guy we haven't talked about yet, but I will be getting an ungodly amount of him on DraftKings because of all the value. But I think all these plays are good. Greg, do you have any one here you'd come under the field on?
No. So Bogdanovic is, to me, a little bit stronger of a play on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings. The price is a little bit cheaper at $5,500. Also, there's positional scarcity issue at small forward on FanDuel. Not to say that there aren't no options at the position, but I mean, Brandon Ingram is out. LeBron James is out. So then you get the most expensive small forward is Jaylen Brown at $7,700. So, I mean, it's somewhat slim options at the small forward position on FanDuel. And where we have to roster 2 of them, Bogdanovic becomes a much more important play in my position. On DraftKings, we're looking in the mid-range where there are all those Pelicans guys. There's somebody like Lou Williams who's $1,300 cheaper than Bogdanovic. So I think there's other places to go. I don't really see another logical place to go on FanDuel that's a pivot off of Bogdan.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And I like Bogdan on both sides, but I would agree on FanDuel. One guy who was chalk earlier in the day, which I'm just going to ask you about real fast, and Ty Jerome being upgraded to questionable maybe puts the play in some degree of concern. But Svi Mikhailic's price on FanDuel, on DraftKings, I don't think he was in play for me. I would have gotten less of him even with the value that was out there. But today, I think him over 5K on DraftKings, I don't see getting there. His price on FanDuel, though, is he still in play for you, or is he taking such a jump down because of all the other value that opened up?
So it's twofold. Number one, with Ty Jerome there, I think that Svi plays under 30 minutes. And as somebody who's not a terrific points per minute fantasy producer, it's hard for me to get to him when the opportunity cost becomes, the expense of some of those really strong Pelicans options. So to me, I would maybe have to reconsider if Ty Jerome gets ruled out, but right now I have him in. And then also a really tough matchup against Phoenix, who has been one of the best defense in the NBA this year.
Yeah, I've mentioned Svi a lot on the couple shows that I've been doing this week where there was one day where he was just mediocre, which ended up being nowhere near enough on the slate earlier this week. And then the other day he was great, and I was happy with that part. But I honestly feel like a kind of luck box that last Svi game where he was rebounding at a rate that was unsustainable, shot 9 for 14, wasn't really assisting at a high level. I think for me with Svi, he's fine on FanDuel, but anybody box score watching and chasing him today, I think if Ty Jerome's in or out, I'd be reluctant to play Svi very much on DraftKings, but just wanted to put that take out there. We got a super chat here from Soul Dope 1234 saying, "What's up, fellas? For FanDuel, would you go Doncic, Jaylen Brown, and Siakam, or Lillard, Porter, and Giannis?" It's an interesting twofer, and he's also asked for our thoughts on Robert Williams, but let's do the either or first. Doncic, Jaylen, and Siakam, or Lillard, Porter, and Giannis?
All right, so I pulled up the super chat, so I have the names in front of me. That makes it a little easier than just trying to remember all of them. For me, the answer is going to be Doncic, Jaylen Brown, and Siakam. Although it's pretty close for me. I don't think you could go wrong with either of them, but Siakam is such a high priority play for me on both FanDuel and DraftKings that it's kind of hard for me to get away from him. Although I do prefer Giannis to Luka, but just because I have Siakam as such a high priority play for me on this slate, I'm going to go with the side with him.
Yeah, I'm with you on it. I like Giannis more than Luka too, but I do think Siakam is one of my favorite plays in the slate. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not as big on Kevin Porter Jr. as people are going to be. So I think taking Jaylen Brown instead seems fine. One more
that reminds me, while we're on what is the ownership now for Kevin Porter Jr.? We didn't think to look for that.
Kevin Porter Jr. I gotta put in more. Kevin Porter Jr. on FanDuel, 16%, on DraftKings. He is 8%. So still not a lot. I guess more people on my side of Kevin Porter Jr., but I think what you were saying before, he does become a better tournament play.
Yeah. So, I mean, if the concern before you had with him was the ownership, does this change your outlook on him at all?
Oh no, I still don't have him projected that well. So it was really it was a twofold issue for me with Kevin Porter Jr. But yeah, I'm lower than Awesemo's projection for him, which is just shy of 32. I've got him under 30 flat, which I think feels a little low, and I could probably knock the rates around a little bit, but I just don't think I want to be there very much.
All right, fair enough. I am going to be opposite with you on Kevin Porter Jr., who's in about 30% of the lineups I'm uploading right now.
Interesting. I like him as a player, so I wouldn't even be mad at that. I just feel like based on what we've seen and just having some more guys in there, I just don't know that he's as safe at this price, as he was at a much lower price when he had the castle before him. Robert Williams is the other question from that super chat from Sold Dope. I don't see him in play for me on DraftKings, but do you feel differently whether it be on DraftKings or FanDuel?
Yeah, I also might have a little bit of a Robert Williams bias, something that I've mentioned a few times, but he's somebody who I have on a ton of my DraftKings best ball teams, which means two things. Number one, I want him to play well, obviously, but then also the reason I have him on a lot of my teams is because I think he's really good. He's been a ridiculous points per minute fantasy producer this year. And now that the minutes are finally there for him, I think that we're going to see a lot of really strong games to close the year. So Robert Williams, who doesn't even need all that many minutes at this price point to be a strong play. Since moving into the starting lineup for the Celtics, he's playing 28 minutes per game. He's averaging 37 DraftKings points in those minutes. So I think there's a slight chance we start to see him play over 30 minutes. If that happens, then he's going to be a guy who's priced around 8,000.
We got a question, also another super chat from Zach Anderson saying, DK Cash, would you rather have Siakam or Fred VanVleet? I think based on the ownership, it has to be Siakam. He's going to be a bit higher owned, but both guys to me, I think are perfectly fine cash plays. Just the ownership going to be higher on Siakam, which is tends to be what I follow for cash. Guys you respect, who you think project well, and then guys are going to be owned by the field.
Yeah, so I think here, though, there's a difference also where, both of them are projected to be pretty popular, right? Latest ownership projection on DraftKings, Siakam at 26%, Fred VanVleet at 21.5%. The reason that Siakam is projected to be a little more popular is because of a price difference. Siakam is 7,800 and Fred VanVleet is 8,200. I think that if Siakam was 8,200 and VanVleet was 7,800, the ownership would probably be flip-flopped. So if you have the 8,200 to get to Fred VanVleet, I would play him. I wouldn't leave the $400 on the table to get to Siakam. I still have VanVleet projected higher.
Let's see. Ricky Rubio, a game time decision. Malik Monk going to miss at least 2 weeks. And we got a projection update, which I'm not even sure what's up. That's what scares you whenever we get a projection update. I'm like, I don't know what news could have been updated here. Like, am I missing something? I don't think I'm missing anything, but just keep in mind, if you are an Awesemo Plus member, the projections got updated 31 seconds ago.
Oh, we got a new starting lineup for the Raptors that we missed.
Oh boy, what is it?
Chris Boucher is starting at center.
Okay. All right. That actually,
that's going to matter.
That's going to justify a recrunch, I suppose. Let's see. All right. Let's see how that goes. So what's your immediate thought on that? I'm going to put in Awesemo's minutes projection because I presume that must be the change that was made here. Sometimes we're so on the ball, we don't even see our news alerts that come through while they're updating. But first blush for you, does that make Boucher a more interesting play? Yeah, for sure. So as a starter this year, 3 starts for Chris Boucher. He's averaging 26 minutes in those starts. Overall for the year, he's somebody who only plays 23 minutes. He scores 28 DraftKings points per game in those minutes. So if we give him, 3 more minutes, we're looking at an additional about 4 fantasy points for Chris Boucher. So just assuming a neutral matchup in those numbers, just off the top of my head without changing anything, that would put Boucher right around 32 fantasy points. And considering his price point on both FanDuel and DraftKings, that is going to firmly put Chris Boucher in play. Yeah, so Chris Boucher kind of knocks down my Siakam projection a little bit. I still have him as being, so I have Boucher being the best value amongst the three of Van Vliet and Siakam and Boucher. But I think obviously projection wise, like I have Van Vliet for 45, I have Pascal Siakam for 44. Those guys are going to be in more lineups for me, but I think Boucher very playable. And this is really one spot we didn't have any value. And now you have a pretty good center value play with Boucher at 5,200 on DK. And I think that's a very solid play that I think I'm going to be getting some of.
Yep, that is something I'm updating for right now. And then just wondering, just ballparking what I said before, is that like about what you have for a projection on too, is like somewhere in the neighborhood of 32, 33?
I've got him at 29.4. Awesemo has him at 31. And this is me, like when I don't change the rates, it's going to go more towards the guys who've had their rates affected. So like I put Van Vliet where he is without Kyle Lowry, which is a 28% usage, 30% assist rate. Siakam too gets a little bit of a boost. So that for me, like I wouldn't feel bad about your projection being higher. I'm sure you're going to feel really bad. Greg, known for feeling bad about things. That's the one thing people always say about Greg.
Yeah, that's very, very cognizant of others' feelings.
Let's talk about some other teams that are priorities. I think we've hit pretty adequately on all the main value spots, and there's still some news that could come. Chicago got Zach LaVine and Kobe White questionable. That could open up some theoretical value that benefited our pal Greg the other day as he gave out a great pick of Denzel Valentine as a low-owned play on our last Late Slate show, and that's one of Greg's best calls, I'll say, ever. Nailing a guy who wasn't even in the rotation, had a great day at minimum salary, 3,500 now. He gets probably a bit of a boost if LaVine's out. But one spot that I think is important that's going to go overlooked on the slate, the Lakers to me against Sacramento. These guys are all under 15% owned on DK. On FanDuel as well, Kuzma's the only one picking up over 15% ownership, and it's just barely. But I like Schroeder and Harrell a lot. These rates for these guys without LeBron, without AD, now Andre Drummond joining those guys immediately on the injured list after his debut. I don't want to laugh at an injury, but that's just silly that he plays one game and goes right back out. But I like Schroeder and Harrell a lot today, Greg. I don't know how much I'm going to get in my final sorting process, but how are you feeling about those guys and a spot against Sacramento that has been a fantasy haven for so many teams?
Yeah, I'm finding it hard to get to them just because I have so many other plays I like. I have Harrell at about 5% right now, and he's actually the Laker I have the most exposure to. It's not even that I have the other guys poor as points per dollar plays today. It's just I have so many other guys that I have as being great points per dollar plays. So it's like if I had to rate these guys on a scale of 1 to 10 as plays, like a lot of these guys would be, 6s or 7s, like Dennis Schroeder and Montrezl Harrell. But then there's a bunch of guys who are like 10 out of 10s. And there's not like 1 or 2 of those plays tonight. There's like a dozen of them. So that just makes it hard for me to prioritize plays that are pretty good when we have a bunch of plays that are great.
A couple of questions in the premium Slack, and then we can talk about some of these other teams and any of the ones that we missed. But again, most of your lineups today, most of the Fields lineups today, going to heavily be revolving around the value plays we've been hitting on throughout the show. Seth asking a question that we touched on earlier, but I feel like we can hit it for anybody who's tuning in now. How worried are you of Bogdan and or Capella playing limited minutes tonight? Greg, just your real fast elevator thoughts on that, since we talked about it at length earlier.
Yeah, so I still have a bunch of exposure to Clint Capella. I don't think he plays, well, he's definitely not going to play as many minutes as he did yesterday in an overtime game, but I did give him about 2 less minutes than I would normally give him for this situation, just because of not only the extended minutes he played yesterday, but he also came into the day listed as questionable on the injury report. And there was also some coach speak yesterday that alluded to that they were going to do some stuff with the rotation to maybe reduce guys' workloads a little bit. So Clint Capella is still going to be a guy who's in a pretty big chunk of my lineups. I think he's my highest owned center, but I would have been a little higher on him had it not been for all the minutes he played yesterday. Bogdanovich, I have about half as much exposure as the field has right now.
Another question in the premium Slack from Oz Beasley asking Bledsoe and Bogdanovich or Lewis and OG for a FanDuel GPP. I think that's Bledsoe and Bogdanovich, but you got to start getting different somewhere else in that lineup.
Yeah, it is Bledsoe and Bogdanovich.
Barr is saying, I think Lowry being out helps OG because Lowry's a decent rebounder, and him being out probably helps OG a bit in the rebounding department. I think Lowry's rebound rate's been very low this year. That doesn't really matter, but just for the sake of completion, only a 9% rebounder. I mean, if all of that went to OG, maybe, but I don't know. Just nothing for me that pops out with OG being meaningful, but a little bit of usage, a little bit of rebounding can be the recipe. Anthony Izzo asking CP3 or Ja Morant in FanDuel cash. I got to say, Greg, haven't really thought about either of these guys very much on DraftKings today, but for FanDuel, how would you feel about CP3 or Ja Morant for cash?
Let me see the ownership for these guys. Morant's actually pretty popular on FanDuel. So Morant considering that he's 26% projected ownership on FanDuel at 6,800. Yeah, I think that he would be the choice there, and no issue with that, considering that he's going to be pretty popular.
Yeah, that's sort of the kind of play you make in cash. That's going to be more site specific, but yeah, Morant being a little bit cheaper, the field being there, about a quarter of the field projected to be there, 25% according to the most recent run of ownership projections from Awesemo. So that is going to be more than enough positive things. Actually, we just got one more ownership update. And if you guys had gotten to 750 likes, I'd give it to you again right now, but you didn't get there. So that's how I'm going to punish you, is making you pay for our premium products that so many people pay for. That's really showed them, Greg. All right, let me get this into my sheet. M. Paglia just tagging me without the question. You addressed it a little, but how is a pivot of KPJ off of Bogdan? Greg, you sort of talked about it, but how would you feel about just maybe getting 5% Bogdan and putting the rest on KPJ?
I mean, I have more than 5% Bogdan, but I have, where did I come in on? I have Kevin Porter Jr. in 30% of my lineups now. So I like Kevin Porter Jr. more than Bogdanovich. I have them projected fairly similarly, at least relative to a points per dollar sense, but we've got Porter's picking up so much less ownership on DraftKings now. On FanDuel, Porter's coming in at 16.8% projected ownership, Bogdanovich at 31. So I mean, I just look at the massive gap in ownership between the two, and guys who I don't view significantly different. I lean towards Porter as being the stronger tournament option.
I'll take one free one from YouTube just to keep it all fair for everyone. Morant or Holmes for a GPP, no site given, but two completely different positions, two different guys. I feel like if we're talking FanDuel, it has to be Morant, but I presume this must be a DK question. So
yeah,
what would be your lean?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way that somebody is considering those two on FanDuel with the positionality, but they're also the same price about on DraftKings. Holmes at 7,500, Morant at 7,600. I have Morant projected higher than Holmes, so Morant is the answer. Holmes is not somebody I considered at all for this slate.
Yeah, Morant I have about 8 points higher today as a median projection, and Awesemo is 1.1 behind me. So yeah, that's going to be the same thing for all the great minds in DFS projections, it seems. Any other teams that we haven't hit on that you're getting a lot of guys? I talked about the Lakers as being my semi-sneaky team, but is there one that you're getting a lot of because of either the value out there, or you're just getting a lot of because of how the lineups look?
By the way, I'm getting Chris Boucher a pretty significant amount now. And then also something that somebody brought up in the YouTube chat, which definitely holds true, is with Boucher starting, that hurts Anunoby, in my opinion. So Anunoby didn't make it into any of my DraftKings lineups now, and he was in about 10% before. So Boucher, my two highest owned centers on DraftKings are Boucher and Clint Capella now. So I think this is a good spot for Boucher. And then hopefully with this news coming out fairly late-ish, I think that it's going to suppress his ownership at least a little bit.
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, any reason you'll give me to bash OG Anunoby after I dug my heels in earlier, I will take it. But yeah, Boucher, higher usage, better rebounder. Those are not good things to put against Anunoby when I think he's been getting an unsustainable role here, though. We'll find out today. Maybe he kills Chris Boucher. Wouldn't that be the fun irony of it all, that OG perseveres after I've bashed him so mightily on this show? Matthew Reinert, explain how that hurts OG. Boucher is a higher usage guy than what they've had out there previously, and also rebounds more. So that's like the most direct way you can hurt somebody.
Yeah. So from a minutes perspective, it's not like, Boucher's starting, therefore OG Anunoby plays less minutes, but it's Chris Boucher starting. There's less shots to go to Anunoby, and there's probably, over the course of the game, on average, he gets, I don't know, just making up a number off the top of my head, like 1.5 less rebounds, which when you consider the scoring and how price sensitive everything is on DraftKings and FanDuel, if you expect somebody to get, 1 rebound less, that's 1 less fantasy point. And that makes a pretty big difference. Like if you go into Fantasy Cruncher and there's a guy who you're getting in like 40% of your lineups, just go take 1 fantasy point off their projection and then rerun optimal lineups and just see how much that impacts how much exposure you get. And like 1 fantasy point of a projection matters a lot.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And yeah, I think that just overall looking at the numbers, that sort of makes sense. And and again, Matthew saying thanks, Spags. Yeah, I wasn't trying to get to shit talk you or anything, but just want to try to explain these things when they go, because sometimes these types of questions come from a place of just people, not being as familiar with the way that the projection models work and all of that. But yeah, you're taking Aaron Baines off the court, who had some of his stints. I'm looking at Popcorn Machine right now. Last game, he had no stats besides 2 fouls in his first stint. His second stint, he missed 1 3, did nothing else. His third stint, he had He had 2 rebounds and an assist, but missed a 2 and had a tech. So yeah, putting Boucher out there is just going to be more productive alongside Anunoby, and that's going to inherently make Anunoby less productive. And sometimes in a way where both guys end up less viable, but that's not the play that we're making today. Isaiah Battle's asking a question, Greg, which you might be more equipped to answer, but is Chris Boucher a must play? I don't think he's a must play because I think I'm saving so much in other positions for me that I don't know that I'm going to get a ton of Boucher.
No. So he's one of my more most rostered players. But like when I also like must play is kind of a difficult definition because I think of a must play as a guy who it's like you absolutely have to play in cash, or somebody like in GPPs is in like Johnson. 80% plus in my lineup. Something like James Johnson is a must play. That's somebody that you absolutely have to have in cash games. Who else would I say? Like Fred VanVleet on FanDuel. That would be somebody I'd consider a must play. Like Chris Boucher is just somebody who I'm going to have a significant amount of in GPPs. But if somebody told me they built a cash lineup without Chris Boucher, I wouldn't say like, oh, you have to redo the entire thing.
We've got a question from Callie Suss asking how many minutes do you have Boucher for now that he's starting? Only 24 minutes from Awesemo. So that also could be part of why Greg's projection was a little higher, because I presume you might have given Boucher a few more. But Awesemo's minutes I tend to find do a good job striking that middle balance where, it could be a bit higher, if you were looking at it. But Boucher could also run bad. There are some ways it could go poorly and he just sees less run. This spot against Golden State, there's not a true center across that I think could hurt him. So I think 24 minutes to me feels like a pretty good floor minutes projection.
Yeah, I did 26. He's made 3 starts this year. He averaged 26 minutes per game. That's generally what I tend to do when somebody has a handful of starts. And as long as there's nothing like crazy going on in the matchup, I'll just give them whatever they've done so far in that role, playing time wise.
All right, we got about 7 minutes left to lock. I'm going to have to stop this crunch momentarily and just take what I can get. Anything else, Greg, that we haven't mentioned at all that you find important? I feel like Golden State, we didn't talk about much. And for me, these guys are mostly non-factors. I know people will maybe want to play Wiggins a little bit more. I guess the ownership projection for Wiggins still pretty low, only 7%. Jordan Poole, to me, more of a play on FanDuel. The 8% for him on DraftKings feels about right. But Wiggins, I wouldn't chase. Draymond, if I get him in lineups, I won't be mad. But that's sort of the interest for me with Golden State, even with Steph out.
Yeah, I don't really have any exposure of note to the Warriors guys. Wiggins also has gotten to be more expensive. Like, remember when we were all really high on Wiggins when Curry first got injured and went out? Wiggins was 5,200 on FanDuel and like 5,300 on DraftKings at that point in time. So it's a little bit different now that he's more expensive. Also, like we said before, everything is associated with an opportunity cost. And there is a whole bunch of good plays on this slate who I have projected higher than Wiggins and are cheaper than him. So Wiggins, it becomes difficult for me to get to. Here's one thing we haven't talked about, pay up options. What did you do in that respect?
So right now I'm going to pull this crunch out and sort through it. But in my crunch itself, where I got to 1532 lineups, I ended up with 52% Giannis and 18% Luka. And I think with my sorting process, I presume I will have pretty close to 100% Giannis.
Yeah, I am higher on Giannis than I am Luka. That's been the case pretty much all day. Earlier, when I was looking at our boom bust tool, Luka had about half the odds of booming that Giannis did, also about half the odds of ending up in the optimal lineup. So Giannis to me was a stronger pay up option. I have a few lines with both of them in. Giannis I have right now in, let's see, it looks like Giannis is in about 60% of my lineups, and then we have Luka at 20 for me. So both guys who are in a good portion of my lineups, but Giannis I'm way more invested in than Luka for this slate.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Let's see. Can you just take lead for a minute here while I sort this out so I can give people what I'm actually getting?
Yeah. And then also, if anybody has questions, definitely jump into our Slack chat and I'll answer those. Here's a question. Jordan Poole as a FanDuel GPP option. So Jordan Poole to me is not a strong play on DraftKings. FanDuel, totally different story, where Poole is priced down all the way to 4,200. I think Poole is one of the best point guard plays on all of FanDuel. If I look at the exposure I have for point guards, the only point guard I have with more exposure to is Eric Bledsoe. So Jordan Poole, definitely a very high priority play for me on FanDuel. Not so much on DraftKings just because of the price difference.
And I would say same thing for me too. I think he's playable on DraftKings, but not one that I think is a great play. But on FanDuel at that price point, I think you can make a better case that he's a great play.
From A Game 2323, who is the pivot off of Draymond if he doesn't play? Draymond's probable. So to me, whenever anybody's listed as probable, I just assume they're playing. There is no time. If somebody's listed as probable, I assume they're in. If somebody's doubtful, I assume they're out. Obviously, every once in a while, there's a goofy situation where, hey, Paul George is actually out, and then all of a sudden he's questionable, and then he's playing. But those are outliers. Those are things that happen. Like 1 out of 20 situations that somebody's listed like probable or doubtful or something like that. So just assume that Draymond's in. I wouldn't sweat it too much. From Nicola in our premium Slack chat, Hayward and Lou Williams versus Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Porter Jr. on FanDuel. That is Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Kevin Porter Jr. for me by a pretty wide margin. Even though you are not the staunchest of Porter Jr. supporters, I would assume that you're more on him and Nickeil Alexander-Walker than Gordon Hayward and Lou Williams, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I like Lou and Gordon Hayward's fine, but I would agree. Like, I think your case for Porter Jr. is the best one. He's not going to be that highly owned. We know there's a ceiling. So I think for a tournament, that's the kind of play that I'd be very willing to make. Stupid Wes Iwundu being a Wesley Iwundu. That I was like, why is this coming up NA? And that's why. Just, I don't want to play Wes Iwundu, and yet here I am.
All right. If anybody else has also only a couple minutes until lock. Also somebody did say that Draymond has been confirmed in the starting lineup, so not a big deal anyway. Here, somebody asked in the YouTube chat, is Nico Mannion a sneaky value play? No. And he will be sneaky, but that doesn't necessarily mean a good thing. But he could play, okay. He's going to have to get extended minutes with Steph Curry's out, but still look at this slate. If this was one of the slates where we have, Harden to pay up for, Giannis, Luka, and then there was no value options, like, oh my God, like I just need to roster somebody for cheap. That's the situation where I'd start to look at Nico Mannion on a slate. It's not where we have, legitimately like 12 to 15 really strong value plays. So no reason to get somebody like Nico Mannion on this slate. Also,
I got all my stuff in, so I'm good.
Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. Happy that I killed enough time. And the slate's also almost locked at this point in time. But since he was brought up, I think this is a good way to close. How are you handling Domantas Sabonis, and what are your expectations there?
So what's the timing of that game? Because I think I have so many Pelicans, and if that game lines up, I think that would be my ideal. So that game's at 8 and New Orleans at 9. So we're not going to know that yet. I presume that I'll have enough roster space to swap around. And I guess the priority becomes Miles Turner and then to some extent LeVert and Brogdon. But I think that's one I should have no issue swapping to. So I think I'm just waiting to see what the news is, because I think I have 70% of each Pelican in every lineup for the most part. So I'm getting I'm getting all these guys in enough spots where I think it's going to naturally allow me to make some swaps. I have 100% Bledsoe right now, 100% James Johnson. So that to me is the way that it's going. I think when you have enough players late naturally, that's great. If you were to try to force some room in there, I think that would also be logical. But to me, the guys that gain are Turner, and then even Turner, maybe a little bit insecure in terms of what he'll actually do. But Brogdon and LeVert, I think, become really good tournament plays. So that would be the priority for me.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And then, like Zach LaVine is questionable. That's a 9:00 game, and that's going to start at the same time as New Orleans. So since the New Orleans game starts late, I'm going to have most of my lineup spots open until that game starts anyway. And that's one of the later games of the night. So this is a slate where I think that late swapping is going to be pretty easy.
Same thing too with Minnesota. If Rubio gets rolled out and you get McLaughlin starting, I think he's probably another one to put in a lot. And honestly, might be as good of a play as James Johnson as a 3K-ish guy.
Yeah, and it's people aren't going to be swapping at that point in the night. Like if people already have these cheap Pelicans guys and they know they're good plays, like these guys are just going to go under-owned.
Yeah, with 20 minutes for McLaughlin, I have him at 17.6, which would make him a good value. So he would be one of my favorite plays on the slate if he does end up starting for Rubio. So to me, that's the most important one to watch out for. Greg, what are the final plugs for you here? I know we both have shows tomorrow, but give the people everything you want to plug.
Just follow me on Twitter at Ehrenberg DFS. Usual stuff. Come troll me. Come tell me when you do well. DM me. Just hang out with me. Be my friend, please. Other than that, we'll have never-ending run of shows. So also subscribe to our YouTube channel, because like I've been saying, especially now with baseball starting, if you're subscribed to our YouTube channel, your players are 33% more likely to hit a home run. That is all the more reason to subscribe to the YouTube channel. So go do that, and then watch all of the shows that we're going to be having for every sport throughout the weekend and basically 24/7 now.
Yeah, make sure to hit that promo code starting9 as well. 9 days of Awesemo MLB for $9 if you go to awesemo.com/join. Good way to get yourself another sport in the mix with all the MLB content that we're going to have going on tomorrow with Deeper Dive. Saturday, I believe, is going to be Greg doing that part. Tomorrow, I'll be doing the Live Before Lock show. I think with Terry. I think they moved that around again on us after I get a fresh vaccine in my arm so I could finally be one step closer. I was going to say to being human, but I'm still probably pretty far from that even if I do have all the vaccines. So tune in tomorrow. Follow at Chris Spags, follow at G Ehrenberg DFS, follow at Awesemo_com. Shout out to our producer Tyler for keeping us on the straight and narrow as always. We appreciate you guys for watching. Have a great weekend. Good luck.